and welcome to another episode of Lore Ramblings. I almost said Dice Scum Live. That's a completely different thing. That's us looking at books live. Hello there, everyone. The name is Adam.
And I'm Tech Priest, and this is, well, I have to say this is one of the weirder settings of the book for a variety of reasons. How do I put this? It exists. It's a thing. They published this.
So, with that in mind, let's take a look at God's Own Country, which is 1950s New Zealand.
Now, the fun bit of this is that they did research. All right, they did a lot of research, and they definitely put effort into this.
They had to. They kind of had to, because unless you were a New Zealander, you're not gonna know this.
You're not gonna know absolutely fucking shit about this time period.
Hell, I don't even think New Zealanders really know too well about the 50s. Like, they'll know about, say, Michael Savage and their contribution to Anzac. They'll know about the first Labour government they ever elected. They'll know about their independence. They'll know about the history of the Maori, but...
Yeah, and the Maori are tied into this quite a bit. But it's in a weird way where I'm like it both makes sense, but it's also just a little bit out there. In any case,
before we go on, Squirrel Killer, when do we get a new book? Well, we're actually almost done with this one.
The last two settings. After this, it is Into the Cold and the Bowery Dogs.
Which that one's fun.
Which are both very good and very fun. They're basically modern settings at that point. Like the major difference being that there's no cell phones.
Huzzah, New Zealand. What facts about New Zealand do we know?
There are more sheep than people.
That's one. They, at one point during the war, tried to show their industrial independence by building a string of tanks. The Bob Semple is the more well-known one, but they also made what's called the Schofield
tank. The Schofield is actually a very interesting design. It's, I think, a Christie suspension.
Not really.
Or something similar to it.
What happened was, after Bob Semple designed essentially an emergency tank in the event, like it was designed for Home Guard. Around the same time, I believe it was a guy with ties to car manufacturing, because there were a few isolated car companies that actually produced chassis, I believe, for New Zealand, decided to get a bunch of them together and design a tank based on what they had available, which were like light tractors and car parts. So it had a quasi-Christie suspension in the sense that it was designed to be fast.
I think it could be fast and it could even use wheels. It's a very interesting little design. I don't know if they built many of them.
They only built like two, and that was just because by the time they were
proof of concept, yeah.
Well, what happened was by the time they were really musing on it, the U.S. was like, here's some M2s.
Yeah, here's some of our shitty tanks.
Here's our M2 Stewarts.
Build your own.
Or here's a Sherman.
Yeah. I mean, New Zealand is also in a weird position, like, globally. It is the most isolated country on the planet. New Zealand is to give you an idea, the New Zealand's like zone of responsibility for like maritime trade is absolutely enormous, because it is all empty ocean. New Zealand, I think, is one of the furthest like places you can get before you get to an actual continent.
To give you an idea, before New Zealand was colonized, it was known as the land of birds, because most mammals, not even marsupials, showed up.
It's off, like, compared to the major continents, like the Americas and the Eurasian African land masses. New Zealand's in fucking middle of nowhere, out in the South Pacific.
It's more interesting because, fun fact, did you know New Zealand used to be almost completely underwater? It's part of it's one of two what are called part of several microcontinents. The other one is actually Kerguelen, which is a very tiny island off in the what is it? The South Indian Ocean, owned by France. Basically, that one sank so New Zealand could rise back up.
It had to sink so New Zealand could swim.
which as a result is why it's so bird heavy, including such beautiful animals like the kakapo and the kiwi bird.
Oh, and don't forget the world's only alpine parrot, the Kia.
Yep, the kia, and also the giant weta,
Yeah.
which is
New
a
Zealand is
huge fuck
also
off cricket.
New Zealand's also the place where the last of a very unique lineage of reptiles is found, where they're kind of reptiles are kind of not called the Tataras. They technically have three eyes, sort of. It's weird. They're weird little they're weird little guys. And that they've survived this long is an absolute fucking miracle. They are I think they are the only example of like the non saurian archosaurs. Like they're a really weird biological entity that it's like how the fuck did they survive? And the answer to that is
Oh
nobody
yeah,
goes to New
yeah. I
Zealand.
think they're non-diapsids. That's what I think they're called.
Yeah, yeah, they're weird. They're
Basically,
really weird.
archosaurs, like most body plan types, essentially were the ones to I think invent the diapsid skull or synapsid skull. I don't remember. I
But they're
don't
not
remember.
either.
They're,
I
they're from
think.
they're from before the Permian extinction period. All I do know is that we know more about. I know more about the.
Tuatara. That's the name of it.
Oh yeah, the
They
Patara lizard.
are
Yeah,
they're part of a distinct lineage of reptiles. They're endemic to New Zealand. They're the only surviving member of an entire order, uh, which is pretty fucking impressive when you consider that their their closest living relatives are like lizards, but they diverged from lizards about 250 million years ago.
that'd be Triassic period actually.
Yeah. Uh,
Wasn't Permian. Permian's a bit older, I think. Not by much though. And they're all getting destroyed by house cats.
yeah. However, they are making a slight. They're actually not considered that threatened.
Well, yeah, Pataras are a little better off than say the Kakapo or Kia. Although those ones are doing okay-ish because of efforts in conservation. That is one thing New Zealand's been pretty good about.
Yeah. Again, Tutara are kind of all over the place. Their main thing is that they're not actually on any of the main islands right now. I think they're on
It's
like
like the
all the
Weta
islands
bugs.
off the coast.
It's like the Weta bug.
Uh, the they're kind of in a weird situation where they're not in the North Island anymore, aside from a few small breeding pairs, but mostly because of the introduction of rats, actually, not cats.
That too. We introduced
Um,
Norwegian rats.
so they're on these little islands now. There there's enough genetic diversity and enough population that they're totally going to basically survive. They're about the size of an iguana. They're really cute looking. If you Google them, I mean, we could bring up an image of them. They look so weird.
I
Kind
will
of.
see if I can find an image of one and dump it in because we know a lot more about the biology of things than we do. Oh, let me see. My brain is a little screwy since I did play around with hotkeys, so I don't remember. There we go. We're good.
Yes, they are very
Tuatara lizard.
very yeah. Tuatara.
I probably spelled it wrong, but don't worry. I will find. Oh, they are adorable.
Yeah, look at them.
Let me see if I can get one with its mouth open. Yeah, there we go.
They look like little like plush animals you'd find somewhere.
Yeah, the Tuatara. They're great. Let me get them. Let me get them when I remember I'm supposed to download the image. Wow, Adam, your brain ain't working too good right now. It's being a pain in the ass. There we go. There we go. And then I can show you the Tuatara in all of its lizardy glory. Here he is. Ah,
He is a good boy.
he is great.
Is he on
So
stream yet?
Imsit,
Let's
you
see.
did bring up that their relations with natives is very interesting. Yeah, because unlike Australia, New Zealand, because it was even more out there than Australia, they had to come up with new solutions to dealing with the Maori. They couldn't just do what they did to the Aborigines of Australia. Also, just in terms of population density, New Zealand was backwater of a backwater.
It's also interesting to know that the Maori were, well, for one thing, they had much more complex societies than
Well,
the
because
the
they had a founder crop. Okay, so Maoris are part of the Polynesian cultural group, and a variety of cultures way, way, way back in the day had what are called crop packages, and this included domesticated animals, which included livestock, dogs, uh, founder crop, secondary crops, that sort of thing. The Aborigines never really had an opportunity to do this, mainly because their homeland never had a good source of what you would call a founder crop, you see. Um, Basically, what's a founder crop? It's a specific vegetable or like a tuber or a cereal that produces enough food at once that it actually would be relatively easy to domesticate and you'd get enough to actually want to settle down. Australia has quite a few, like their bush food really shows they do have a lot of secondary supporting crops that'd be amazing, like acacia trees, wattles, amazing pseudo cereal, drought tolerant, and can provide a lot of grain, essentially grain for free. And you can use their bark, gum, and so many others. Macadamia nuts, they're native to Australia. There's a type of lemon tree relative and a type of tea impersonation. And they also have their own yams. They're just not productive enough to have been a founding crop. That's Meanwhile, the Maori, they had their own developed crop. It is specifically best tuned to their ecosystem, which is the subtropics. They had to adapt when they came to the islands. The North Island, not as much as the South Island, mainly because the climate was noticeably different than, say, Fiji or Nauru. And what also helped is they had, I believe, the moas native to New Zealand, and they were able to hunt those. But anyway, they had crops; they were able to settle. So in this case, the Europeans had to play it more like Africa than, say, the Americas. Population density and societal organization made it a lot harder to suppress. And because of that, they had a lot more organized system, and basically the New Zealanders had to make arrangements with them because otherwise they could cause trouble at home.
Yeah, it's also important to know the Maori have never and are never really a completely unified group. There's a bunch of
They
different.
had to, yeah, they had to divide and conquer. And actually, to give you an idea, the conquest of New Zealand was mainly due to the efforts of giving each tribe guns and then
Partly that,
watching them
and
decimate
it,
themselves.
and also just reaching an actual treaty with the Maori. Like,
I think it's
uh,
called the Rapata Pack or Rakata Pack or something like that.
yeah, they go into this to a certain degree here in this, but one of the things to note when they talk about this is God's Own Country frames the time experience of this sort of thing because for almost 200 years the Maori have been essentially as colonized, I guess is the best way to put it. Um, while of course, but this has disrupted the natural cycle of uh, of the underworld and afterlife inside of New Zealand for some reason, probably because New Zealand's a fucking weird place and there's always weird shit going on.
It might also be a holdover from. So this is first edition Geist, so there's some weirdness. In particular, this is when they were kind of using Wraith as an inspiration, I think. Because
Yeah,
remember, in
so
Wraith, different regions of the world have their own afterlives. Because literally in Old White Wolf, your souls are different based on whether or not you have specific physical features or melanin in the skin.
yeah, in this case it's like no, it's like no, no, no. This is just this area and it's weird. It's only really been happening for maybe 200 years and it might just be because suddenly there's a lot more people here than there once was.
And that is the thing. So with that, I'm going to show the opener of the book, which covers originally Ned Poindexter, Kawaka, a Sin Eater for 20 years. Basically, his
Yeah.
job is to kind of keep an
Y-
eye on the mystic roads, the ghosts, spiritual
Yeah.
activity. And they're out of whack because in the 1950s, to give you an idea, I think New Zealand's population doubled.
Yeah, like New
It,
Zealand's
it, it was it was
population.
under a million originally, and then by the late 50s, I think it just touched 2 million.
Yeah, this is a time of massive expansion, but even before then, like there was issues, and it might just be that you have so many people moving everywhere, and you're breaking up.
I'm breaking up?
Or was I breaking up?
No. Is it me that's breaking up?
No, it might just be me. Hold on.
So while he's fixing his issues, let's look into God's own country.
All
Give
right,
me,
it seems
give
to be
me
fixed.
God's own country, there to live and there to die. God's own country, fairest region, resting beneath the southern sky. God's own country, frame blah 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 blah. It's a poem. So it's the experience of living in New Zealand in the 50s, which we talked about biology. Do you want to know? Here's my experience with New Zealand history. They gave guns to the Maoris. The Maoris kind of murdered each other, and then after their tribes decimated each other due to this, they settled in previous lands and originally exploited slash conquered slash did things. Then eventually did treaties when they realized it wasn't going to be as clean. I can't really say clean, but efficient. Let's go with efficient. Yeah, that as it was in Australia. And then they were often kind of taped together with Australia. I believe originally they were going to be part of the same colonial administration, but then when they sought dominion, basically they said fuck that.
Yeah, New Zealand was like, we are so far away from Australia that it's
We are
like,
not going to let the Aussies dictate how our society works. So they
yeah,
became kind of a backwater of a backwater, like straight up. Just there's not much. Their biggest contribution was during the Great War and in World War II. In the Great War, they got to serve alongside the Australians as they got trapped on Gallipoli, thanks to good old Winston Churchill's giga-brained idea, combined with the British literally giving warning shots to areas that the Ottomans were planning to boost up in defense. I'm
yeah,
not even
and
kidding. There was kind of a weird parting shot, like chivalrous warning, if I remember, given by I think it was an idiot captain of one of the bombardment forces or something. Basically, the landing sites were leaked, I think, about a month early, and it gave the Turks enough time to build a primitive and finish some defensive works there. They were building some, they were able to just finish building them and then add a couple of defensive lines too. Good job, Winston. Uh,
yeah,
and then after that, I believe they fought in Mesopotamia, where they got
yeah,
to fight the Ostasian Corps, which is the Germans sending troops to prop them up. That caused some problems among. Basically, this is where their desire to be even further independent came from, because the it's commonly seen that the British sent them just to die for their own sake, and there's truth in that. There was truth in that. But and then in World War II, it kind of reprised itself. They did a lot in the Africa campaign, and they were seen as fucking terrifying by the people they fought against, mainly because they had the Haka, the war cry. Although they were not as intimidating as the Canadians during the First World War, who took no prisoners. No, seriously. You think the Haka war cry is terrifying? To the Canadians in World War One, war crimes was more of a suggestion. What's that? Fake surrender so I can shoot you? Yeah, they'll do that. They would also shoot you if you tried to surrender. Canadians did not play fair in World War One.
anyway,
But that's about all I know. Oh wait, the United Kingdom had to pull all of their resources away from the colonies and away from the dominions to basically prop up their home army after the Expeditionary Force lost a lot of their heavy stuff in Dunkirk. And that's where the Bob Semple and Schofield came from, because they couldn't get anything from the mother country. America propped them
yep,
financially.
they
And
they immediately sent the New Zealanders to North Africa along with the Australians.
oh, and it's around
Um,
this time the first Labor government happened in the late 30s. So what happened was the beginning of essentially renewed treaties of friendship with the native Maoris, and and essentially dealing with the issues that colonialism brought. It was the not necessarily the first time, but it was the first long period concerted effort to essentially mend fences.
yeah,
That's about all I know from the New Zealand point of view. There's one other thing I know about 50s New Zealand besides population doubling, and it's a joke made by the Australians on their behalf. When asked, an Australian woman was like, "Oh yeah, yeah, I've been to New Zealand." When they were asked what it was like, "Oh, well, the problem is it was closed when I got there." because during the 50s, for some reason, there seemed to be regular curfews. I don't know if this Geist book talks about that, but yeah. Wait, an English colonial power being taken advantage of? Where have I heard this before? I don't know. It seems to be a common theme. It's like poetry; it rhymes.
In any case, they do this kind of like
Waitangi, yeah, there we go. Waitangi Treaty. I didn't remember.
yeah.
I did not remember the
They
name.
they talk about this, but New Zealand also is unique in that like something like 50% of the population was in some way involved with the war effort.
They kind of had to be all in
Yeah.
effectively. They didn't have a large population, so
And it kind of goes into like the theme is one of the themes is colonialism because it as an aspect of transition, which is a theme of Geist itself. In that that New Zealand is sort of changing from being kind of like this kind of like, well, the Maori are kind of left to do their own thing to
because originally the setup was similar to what the American reservation system, not maybe not to that degree, but the idea is there were set areas that were called tribal lands where basically they ran shop, and they were kind of just left to be their own thing. The Labor government effectively changed that during the war because total mobilization had to be a thing. And what happened was a lot of those tribals actually came to the city and vice versa. The lines between tribal land and just the state of New Zealand blurred heavily.
the point where they kind of just merged it.
Essentially, they made the Waitangi Treaty specifically to kind of rework everything. Rather than this weird, and on top of that, New Zealand was rapidly becoming not quite rural anymore. It still mostly is, like to this day, but originally it was Thomas Jefferson's wet dream. Like in the 1900s to 1920s, there was Wellington, and then the port on, and then I forget the other city, the one on South Island, and that's about it. That's
Auckland,
about
I think
it.
you're thinking of.
Auckland. Outside of those two cities, there's like a couple of towns where you can get your basic provenance, but it was mostly sheep farms and occasionally just going out, I don't know, hunting kakapo or whatever. Or maybe you imported animals from the homeland so that you could destroy their ecology a bit.
Aside from sheep, which really don't, they kind of just replaced the large birds, flightless birds of the Maori, all killed and ate because it's a large flightless bird on an island where people are. They're gonna get eaten. It is the way of things.
It is
Uh,
the way of things. Oh, also, the giant eagle that ate them also went extinct at the same time.
yeah, because suddenly all their food's gone. It would have been really rad to have one of those things preying on sheep, though.
I would love that. Like, I think it's called Hast's eagle. Imagine if that was
Yeah,
still around and it was just like this big fuck off bird.
yeah.
It'd be
In
so
in any case,
glorious.
when it comes to this, though, that with all this is that the losses of both the world wars really had a massive impact on New Zealand compared to basically every other nation involved because New Zealand was probably the smallest. Like,
Population? No, no, Luxembourg technically, but
well, Luxembourg. I mean, Luxembourg is the biggest technically on the planet. Luxembourg didn't actually fight.
how about
Luxembourg.
Denmark? They fought for 6 hours.
Well, Denmark still has a larger population, like a double to triple the population of New Zealand.
Yeah, and
Uh,
that says a
and
lot because to give you an idea, Denmark at this time was actually about as agrarian as New Zealand.
yeah, Denmark.
Denmark did not have much of an industry at that point.
Denmark still is kind of a joke country, but like we're talking even
But
more
yeah,
so than now.
effectively they were all were in. They had to give women the ability to work just because they had to send
It's
more men off to die. They had to renegotiate treaty with the Maori tribe so they could get more of them into the army or to work at home.
yeah, which is actually interesting. In
They
the
forced
Maori
people
were
to go out of retirement.
yeah the Maori were very integrated into the New Zealand army. They had the Maori battalion for one thing.
And on top of that, they often were sent to where the Australians or Canadians went, to the point where to the point where originally instead of it being Anzac, it was pushed maybe they called Kanzac. That changed up because I think what happened was the Canadian. Oh yeah, the Canadians got pissy because they were more developed than Australia and New Zealand. So they were like, "We're not going to be with these fucks." And also, stop treating us like we're a puppet, Britain. So Canadians got their own command. While the Anzacs kind of did their own thing, New Zealanders were usually stapled in. I believe their biggest contributions, besides assisting in North Africa, was mainly in the Southwest Pacific, like in Papua New Guinea and fucking nightmare places like that.
They didn't actually fight much in Papua New Guinea. They fought mostly actually in Italy.
Italy, okay, yeah, fair enough. I don't.
They were part of
Let me
the
be real.
Southern
I know
European
the
campaign.
Australians much better than I know the New Zealanders.
The Australians were all over, but the New Zealanders were pretty focused because I think there was a grand total of 2 divisions
That's the most
of
they
New
could do.
Zealanders.
Good. Thank you for correcting me. I know Australian history a little better than I do New Zealand. No offense.
Yeah, they were part of the Italian campaign. They were also
The
part of the
Italian
North
campaign
African
was a
campaign.
wild ride. So, to give you an idea, the Italian campaign was also staffed by the Free French Legion, particularly their Algerian and
Algerian and
Senegalese
Moroccan.
divisions.
The Senegalese were not
Oh no,
actually.
they were in Operation Dragoon. Yeah,
Yeah,
it was
the
Algerian
Senegalese
troops.
were not actually deployed until the actual fighting on the mainland.
Yeah, it was Operation
So they
Dragoon.
deployed
Correction.
because they were because they were like,
It
well,
was
the Senegalese
Algerians
have
and
never fought in
Moroccans.
mountains before. They've never seen a mountain before. We're going to throw them. We're just not going to put them into mountain fighting. Instead, we're going to put Algerians, Moroccans who do know what mountains are and have lived on mountains before.
The Algerians were
into fighting
actually
in mountains.
seen by the Italians as arguably the second or first scariest, depending on who you asked.
Also, they very much were accused the most of rape. This was a
Oh, it
major
wasn't
problem.
just that. To give you an idea, there was I remember once there was a veteran. I believe it was from. I don't think it was the New Zealand division. I think it was an American actually. He was part
Yeah.
of. It was attached to the Algerian division. Like they were linked together. And he was just kind of remarking, it'd be kind of great if I could get my hands on like an Italian pocket watch or something. The Algerian
Yeah.
man that he was kind of working with kind of nods, saying it would be great. And then the night later, he comes back. There's a bloody knife in hand, and he gives him
He's
one of the
got a
2
fucking
pocket
pocket
watches.
Yeah, they kind of took that a little seriously. The
The Algerians were notorious for taking war trophies in Italy.
The Italians were also notorious. They were also notorious for the fact that the French really didn't bother disciplining them.
Oh no, not at all. Now there were exceptions. I believe the 3rd North African Division was actually very well trained, and on top of that, very disciplined. They actually had a sterling record.
In general, the North African troops weren't very well disciplined. The Senegalese, on the other hand, were actually extremely disciplined and
very polished. Like the third North African was an exception. The Senegalese riflemen. There's a reason why they rioted after the war, because they did their damn job.
They basically the French West African troops were very high quality compared to.
I mean, to give you an idea,
what
they
the French
were
actually fielding.
relied on enough to where they actually guarded the vital junction between the Maginot and the new Dial line during the invasion of France by Germany.
Yeah,
and they actually held enough to where members of the Grossdeutschland division actually, in anger, committed a war crime by essentially executing a company of them.
Yeah,
because they held up the advance, I think, by 6 hours.
The West Africans got the short end of the stick from the French after the war, by far.
Thank you, de Gaulle. Very cool.
Very cool, de Gaulle.
Very cool.
You know, the troops that have actually fought the most for you, which is the North Africans and the Senegalese, and to some degree the Caledonians, and you know, some of your guys over in the Pacific and in Asia. Yeah, we're just gonna ignore them, ignore their contributions, ignore the fact that they were the ones that actually fought the most. Because most of the major French divisions at this time were more like paper commands that weren't actually fighting at all until the invasion of Europe.
Yep. By the way, hey there, Shane. The Algerians sound like fucking Gurkhas. No, the Algerians...
No, they were not. The Gurkhas had actual discipline, standards, training.
And on top of that, the desire to unleash murder.
Yeah, I mean...
The Algerians could be cruel, but they weren't willing to fight to absolute death like the Gurkhas were.
Yeah, the tradition of Gurkha service in the British military is basically one of like we're gonna the to the point where they didn't know some of these guys didn't know that there was a second world war. They thought the first was still going on when they signed up. They were like, "Wow, it's been a long time. How you guys? How's the war been?" Last I heard, it was like 1916, and it was still going on. And it's like, there's like, no, this is a second one. They're like,
The Algerians,
"Oh,
though, much like the Gurkhas, they do have a reputation for being very good at what were known as night raids and stealth. The Algerians were very good at that.
yeah."
That was their specialty.
The Algerians also, again, as mentioned, were basically the French viewed them as savages, so they didn't bother controlling them, and so thus war crime behavior was essentially tacitly encouraged.
Oh yeah. Basically it meant no war crimes in the areas they controlled.
Yeah, totally not doing war crimes. They're doing a lot of war crimes. To the point where like Allied Command had to get involved. I think.
They did.
Thanks
To give you an
Gaulle,
idea,
very
out
cool.
of I think it was like out of the 4 or 5 Moroccan and Algeria, the Moroccans were better behaved, and one of the Algerian divisions, surprisingly, actually, for some reason, was very well trained. I think it was the general under them actually treated them as soldiers and punished them if they got too rowdy. But
Yeah,
two
like
of the divisions were implicated for quite a bit.
yeah.
Besides that, you had the Free Polish Brigade that
Yeah,
actually
the
were the mad bastards that
yeah,
took Cassino.
the first Polish division, I think which was
They were the ones
which
that
was in
actually took
Italy.
Monte Cassino.
Yeah, it was mostly the Commonwealth forces that finally took Monte Cassino, which was
Included the New Zealanders because they were
yes,
pretty
the
damn good
second
at
New
it.
Zealand division, if I remember correctly. There's kind of the Canadians were also heavily involved in Italy. They wanted to like
Basically, you name a weird nation that you wouldn't
they
expect to have.
probably had forces in Italy. Italy was
To,
basically
to,
the sideshow of
to
Europe.
give you an idea, I know I'm almost certain. I think there was a Belgian brigade that was stapled to one of the French divisions
There
actually down there.
was there was a
There was
There
also
was
a
a Polish
free
armored
Dutch.
brigade.
I think there was also a
There
free
was
Dutch regiment down there.
There's most famously the Brazilian Expeditionary Force, which was
The Smoking
supposedly like
Cobras,
a full
yes.
division. In reality, it was maybe like half a brigade.
It was half a
Uh,
brigade and an air wing. They were known as the Smoking
yeah,
Cobras.
the smoking snakes, because I think the joke that somebody like a German said like snakes will start smoking before the Brazilians join the war, so they just took that as their
And don't forget that the Mexicans fighting, the Air Force was held by Mexicans.
yeah. It
They
was
were known as the
Italy.
Aztec Eagle Wing.
Yeah, Italy is like that place where it's like, okay, so are you in the war? Do you want to see ground combat? Please come to Italy. It will be fun. It was not fun. It was very much a long slog.
The
Uh,
Norwegians were not down there. They were too busy basically fighting in the Navy.
yeah, the Norwegians instead were in the navy. I think along with the Danish. I think the Danish had a ship. The Greeks I know had like a couple of ships that were participating
Oh yeah,
throughout the
The
entire
Greeks
war.
were well known for doing. They basically did piracy with those ones too.
Yeah,
Because if you're wondering, the Greeks basically they found a way to weaponize because there's this specific type of sail, lateen sailed like commercial boat. They would strap like a 20 millimeter cannon to the motherfucker, and basically just do pot shots on convoys with them.
yeah.
It was actually
Let's
effective
get back
enough
to
that
New Zealand
well,
though.
no,
Let's
no, it
get
was
back to New
effective
Zealand.
enough that the British actually looked at the idea and made 4 boats that specialized in it to join them.
Yes, the greatest ship of all time, the HMS Gay Viking. This
But
is
yeah,
an actual ship. You can look it up. It exists. It is a real thing. I'm not kidding. I'm not joking. This is not a joke. Back to New Zealand, which is kind of a joke.
so New Zealand sent 2 whole divisions and then some reinforcements. I forgot it was mostly Italy because again, you
Yeah,
mostly think of
and then
Australia when you think of
can we get
Anzac.
back to the book so we're not just going to spend the entire time talking about things because this is genuinely interesting. I just have no idea how you would run it.
Okay, so with that in mind, it's
So
after World War II, and several things have changed. Colonialism, the nature of the Waitangi Treaty means that the old segregated tribal land reservation sort of council land has been bought up partially by the government because they needed them for sheep farms or for iron sand mining because that's actually they did a lot of that where they would mine sand for the iron content,
yeah,
and
this
this meant a
is
lot of Maori were moving to the city. and the lines between tribal and the tribal and traditional and the European state blur.
Yeah. In any case, for moving on to then, the mood is kind of one of those things where it's like it's trepidation because weirdly enough, New Zealand is kind of in a weird situation. It's transitioning from what it was to the modern era, which
By
it
the way, you
is.
don't tell me what to do, Wimsa. If you do, I'm going to start talking about Victor and Kisling, and no one wants that.
No one wants to talk about Quisling. The man that I think was the first man actually executed by Norway in like 30
Norway
years.
legitimately, I think, actually invented the death
I think they
penalty
no,
just
they
for
still
him.
had the death penalty. They just hadn't applied it for like 50 years or something like that. They
First man
literally,
in a century to be hit with the death penalty.
yeah, Quisling's a very special
A
character
man
in
so
terms.
awful, the German, like incompetent, the Germans are like, we don't want this, and put another man in charge the moment he.
The moment they could. The other, so the mood, of course, is trepidation. The other one is isolation because New
You're in New
Zealanders
Zealand.
don't have television in the 50s.
They had radio, at
They had
best.
radio. The mail can take a week to travel in many areas. New Zealand is one of those places where it's like the edge of nowhere. Um, uh, if you're a small rural community, the idea of like someone visiting the town can be news for months. Like, oh yeah, we had someone come into town like 5 months ago. We'd never seen them before. That's really strange, and that's the only news that has happened in 3 years.
Because, again, in the early 50s, it was still very rural. Again, unless you were in Wellington or in Auckland, I think there might be one other city that you might see more tourists or something. You're not going out into the wild. You're not going out into the farms.
Yeah.
Hey, Dark
Then
Sun.
on top of all that, you've got to understand that because sin eaters are not very common as far as supernaturals go. Sin eaters take very specific circumstances to happen. They require, a certain amount of death to become common, and they also require, well, people saying yes to the deal, which is not always a thing because there's plenty of people that just refuse to make contracts with Geist because they're absolutely fucking terrified by them for good reason because these things are often not human looking at all.
And also, again, you mentioned the death aspect. Yeah, Geists really only become well, not even common. Just they become noticeably less common when a lot of death has occurred. So having it right after World War II actually is one of the best times you probably could.
It makes sense for New Zealand, and they even go into this a little bit where they talk about how a lot of the sin eaters in New Zealand weren't born in New Zealand. They're immigrants, or they became bound elsewhere and then ended up back in New Zealand. The so the isolation is one of those things where their connections to other sin eater groups are basically non-existent. There's not a good way for them to stay in touch. Even in the Australian community of sin eaters is very, very different from the one in New Zealand. The American and European ones as well. Like they don't even call themselves sin eaters here. It's very different. They take the Maori name because, well, most of the sin eaters here originally were Maori.
But what happened
So
was that a massive change is occurring. Basically, their methods are due to the spirit world changing, maybe not necessarily working as much, and also they're kind of dying off, and a new generation is coming in.
yeah. Now that said, the terms and the ways that they are used probably still exist in the modern for Australia, for not Australia, for New Zealanders that are sin eaters. They have a nice little glossary here, which goes through like their kind of lexicon of a bunch of like
Because
Maori
it's
terms
Maori, and
because it's a language that basically nobody reading this book is going to be familiar with whatsoever.
mm-hmm. And on
And
top
if
of
you
that,
are,
it's literally a case of you are here for a reason, either because of your deal or because of just what's drawing you. You kind of have to play with what crumbling structure there still is, and this is the organization you're dealing with. This is the words they got. This is how you're going to call it. And
Yeah.
also, if you do know Maori, well, hello there, member of whatever. What are they? I forget what it's called.
The I don't even know. Like there's a bunch of different groups of Maori. I think the technical term is tribal group, but there's like a bunch of them.
Yeah, but you'd have to be hello there, member of one of the many tribes of Maori.
We'd have no idea how you found this podcast, but because I don't think we trend at all in New Zealand.
Also, on top of that, I will say up front, if you do somehow see it and get offended, keep in mind Adam is a lot more familiar. Adam, am much more familiar with Australia, and I know it's wrong, but I will probably fuck it up and confuse the two, even
Uh,
though you have your own
we're
thing.
we're both not very familiar with Polynesian stuff in general. Polynesia is one of those areas of the world where there's just not a lot of focus on it, and
Because it's out in the sticks for us
it's in the middle of the
Americans.
Pacific. Yeah, like we know about Hawaii, but Hawaii and Polynesian is different from New
Literally
Zealanders.
a different hemisphere too.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, here's some of the lexicon. There's the atua, the word for gods, or whatever ancestor spirits you tend to worship. Geists are actually referred to as atua by Tuhunga. What? It's down here. I feel it's a little weird that they use them already. The term already. Tuhunga is a skilled expert. Tuhunga are taught from an
Yeah,
early age.
like basically a tribal specialist in the spooky shit.
Yep.
Uh,
I feel it's a little odd that they introduce it before
I
they.
know they part of it is because this is alphabetical, so
It's fair. It's just something. It's a minor criticism. God's Own from
yeah.
God's Own Country, a phrase used since the turn of the century to describe New Zealand.
I don't think we need to go through all of them. The ones that you really need to know,
Iwi, which is the tribal group. That's what it is. Iwi. I'm dumb.
yeah, the Maori term, which
Karaki has
is
chance. Let's see. Kawaka are their terms for mediums or people who channel ghosts. Kahua is important because that is the term for ghosts.
and then it applies generally for all rank 2 or whatever.
Mana, which actually I do know, it's basically your
We know
essence.
it's been adopted by Western esoteric thought and games and all that for a long time.
Let's see. Po is their term for underworld, which is important to bring up because you deal a lot with the underworld as a sin eater.
Yeah,
Same with the
the
Reinga, which is the afterlife.
yeah the underworld in Wraith First Edition is much more concrete than it is in the second, but it's one of those things where it's like
There's also Taniwas, which are not
yeah
Kahuas. Taniwas are different.
yeah they're like an elemental spirit. This would be more of like an actual spirit. Um, because you've got to remember that ghosts are also essence and can be consumed by spirits. So if you encounter a more human-like spirit in werewolf game, it's very possible it's been eating ghosts. They're different entities, but they can devour each other, and some people say that's how Geists get started. Who knows?
And then last but not least, there's the Waira, which is your inner self or spirit.
Yeah, along with the term Wahanu, I think is the best way to pronounce it.
Wano?
Basically, it means
I don't know.
crew.
Like I'm pronouncing it as
Yeah,
best as I can.
we're trying our best. Please don't be too mad. So right, New Zealand was colonized by the Polynesians 600 years previously. They called their land Atoiora, the land of the long white cloud. I probably misspelled that. Dutch explorer.
Yeah, they called it that also because it itself is a. To give you an idea, the Polynesians really much like to settle in different areas, and
Yeah,
here's the thing: they actually did discover Australia, but here's what they're in their own words. Well, there's several problems. First off, currents. It's a lot harder to leave Australia than it is to accidentally run into it. Second,
yeah,
the part of Australia they're familiar with is also something that Arabic traders also knew. It was
yeah.
known
They
as the
they
land of red because the north part of Australia they were visiting was
yeah
that empty desert, like
the
completely
northwest part
dead
of
of life.
Australia. Yeah, the northwest part of Australia is notably desolate.
Almost
Uh,
completely dead of life. I believe a merchant from that was working with the Spice Islands during the time of not the Abbasids. It was one of the later caliphates. Openly said up front, that
Like
it was
this looks like
it was
fucking hell.
it literally is the devil lives there.
Yeah, like no, there's a couple of Aboriginal groups that live in there, but there's like not a lot of them.
It's so
Interestingly enough, that
desolate,
area of
basically
Australia,
empty.
that area of Australia, though, interestingly enough, does have some of the oldest rock art on the continent.
Because it's the most accessible. Hilariously, despite being completely desolate, it is unironically also one of the better. If you're in the age of sail, it's sadly one of the better places to disembark from. And if you're not very well versed in naval travel, which the Aborigine settler groups would not be, a lot of proto-humans weren't, early humans weren't. Uh,
It's safe to land here. Let's land here.
and then just immediately try to get the fuck to somewhere less shit.
Yeah. The next stuff here is that, of course, the Dutch explorer Abel Tasman, which is where we get the term Tasmania,
And also New
uh,
Zealand, because
mapped some of its
Zealand.
coastline. And encountered the Maori, got into a fight with them because the Maori, people forget, the Maori were incredibly aggressive.
To give you an idea, Polynesians vary in war, but the Polynesians were much like the Vikings in that they did war.
They did war and they did trade.
They were known for both. The Maori were among the more warlike of them, mainly because they had to be, because again their crop package doesn't quite work on. New Zealand was a large continent for them to discover, but unfortunately its climate's different, so some of their staples doesn't grow there. So they lost them. I think it was one of their yams wasn't able to grow there, and like they lost, I think, pigs or something.
Yeah.
Basically, their agricultural package was smaller, so there's less resources, so they're more warlike as a result of that.
Yeah, then we move into the other part of this where it's like, so Cook arrives the first time, he finishes the mapping of it, and settlers come in afterwards, which starts the various Maori wars, conflicts with over these fortifications and hills.
Because the Maori, the best way to describe, they actually do the term, but the Maori, the way their original settlements were essentially hill fortresses.
Yes, I don't know the technical term for
And
it,
they're not
but
like pathetic little things. No, they used
they're pretty
unworked
impressive.
stone. They used unworked stone, earthworks. To give you an idea, their construction was nasty enough. Cannons struggled to bust open those walls.
Yeah, again, very impressive.
The Europeans, there's a reason the Europeans, after their initial wars, tended to have them fight each other rather than fight them directly.
A lot of it was also because, in general, there wasn't really much reason
border.
There wasn't much reason to even fight the Maori in the first place. They kind of the areas that settlers were picking weren't always in Maori-controlled zones, or
well, they were, but like they were considered marginal because of the lack of defensive area.
Yeah, so the Maori weren't really too interested in some of these areas. It was like, yeah, you can stay here.
Or
Who
like,
gives a shit?
you can give it to us if you give us access to gun. And like, what are
Many
those?
gun.
To either gun or crop packages, actually. The Maori were perfectly okay with picking up stuff that could grow in New Zealand.
Yeah.
And they were very much interested in getting chickens and pigs back.
Then we got the first real major treaty between the Maori and the settlers, which basically is the establishment of New Zealand as a country in many people's opinions. It kind of is one of these weird cases where it's like almost the Treaty of Waitangi is very important, mostly because it gives the Maori ownership in lands and makes them officially have the rights of British subjects, which is it's a little bit different between the Maori language and the English language because it's not an exact translation, because not all the words themselves could be directly translated from Maori to English.
Also,
but they're basically identical.
Well, this also leads to, because you mentioned that there was a bit of tension because of that, because
because some of the words don't translate directly, so it's like the closest in both languages you can get, and the general meaning is there, but the actual like specific details can be very
if
disputed.
You're wondering, that's actually why the Italian-Ethiopian War happened.
Yeah,
both of them actually, because the first because they did actually have a pretty treaty. The idea, the Italians phrased it in Italian. The treaty in their language translates it to The Italian, they govern themselves, but the Italian covers their foreign policy. While in the Amharic translation, it gives the emperor the ability to intervene on behalf. Basically, the wording makes it so that the Ethiopians in the Amharic version actually have a little more initiative. I believe they had the ability to negotiate with other foreign powers because the wording on how their actual protectorate would have worked was wrong. Like the translation was
Yeah.
shoddy. And both were signed. Both were signed by both parties because they didn't understand, and that led to the first Italo-Ethiopian War. Same thing happened with the original Waitangi Treaty, which is why, which is actually what when Labor came into power, they sought to follow it closer to I think the Maori interpretation and actually open up more rights.
Yeah, in the 50s was really when the Maoris really started to be able to push back and
Mainly because so many of them fucking died for their country.
yeah, and actually start to reestablish their sovereignty, because because the term sovereignty isn't exactly translatable to Maori. So they went with something as close as possible. Which is mana, basically.
Also, if you're wondering, New Zealand it's not the first to give the right to vote to women. It's not the first to do suffrage. I believe Finland did it first. But it makes sense.
Finland didn't exist at the time, though.
Grand Duchy of Finland actually did give right to the women to vote, if I remember right.
Yeah, but they're not really a sovereign entity at that point.
Fair enough. I'm just pointing it out.
I mean, neither is New Zealand, but still.
Basically, they were among the first. If you're wondering, very commonly the reason that women's suffrage was a thing in low population areas, it allowed you to get more votes. It's really that cynical, but that's kind of how it worked.
Yeah.
Also, because lower populations meant that if you did want to reform society, it was easier because you could just move other people over that agreed with you. It was more though just politicians were like, yes, I can give them the right to vote, and they'll vote for me because I did it.
Yeah. So they kind of have
unironically, just before another shit post. Fun fact: a lot of labor parties back in the 1920s actually did not want to give the franchise to women. Same with working rights too, by the way.
Yeah.
Because it was the working men's party. Bit him in the ass initially too, like in New Zealand. Sorry, I just had to bring it up since, again, one of the big things is New Zealand eventually turns in a Labour Party, which is what runs the state during the Second Great War.
Yeah. So with this in mind, electricity finally arrives about a generation before then. You finally get like radio services and all that. Then New Zealand.
Yes, they didn't have electricity until after the Great Fucking War. That's how that's how backwater it is. No, I'm not dissing. It's just you are an outpost of an outpost because Australia is also kind of an out there kind of land. Just from a navigational point of view, like during the age of steam and sail. And then less than 10 years ago, a lot of them died in the fields of Italy, in the mountains of Italy. New Zealand also finally gets its own car industry because, again, they did have a native car industry. And during World War II, they were given I believe their automotive industry was retooled with American aid to either produce Jeeps or components for half-tracks.
Yeah. In any case, they talk a bit about like the treaty and all that, where it's like, it's a weird thing because it's actually had they kind of imply that the treaty itself has had an impact on the spiritual landscape of New Zealand in terms of the underworld.
Which is a little weird, but I can kind of understand because administrative rights.
Yeah, because it's in debate and flux and all this, that there's somebody like they're trying to figure out what's actually, like, the dead don't know what's going on 100%, I guess is a way to put it.
Well, because it does cover tribal land and other things, and that would include
it covers a lot.
Rights.
It's basically saying that the Maori control the spirit of the nation, right? In a way, because mana as a concept is what we said, like we respect the third article basically what was it? We, the chiefs of the Confederation of the United Tribes of New Zealand, and the separate independent chiefs who have not become members of the Confederation, cede to Her Majesty the Queen of England absolutely and without reservation all the rights and powers of sovereignty, which the said Confederation or individual chiefs respectively exercise and possess. That's like from the treaty. The term though is kind of, that's where it gets weird, right? Because the translation of sovereignty isn't really there. It's more like how would I put it? Like the significance of New Zealand is handed over.
It's similar to how in Japanese there's not a lot of they have like one curse word and really that's it. It's really how you say things that implies the curse in Japanese.
Yeah, like again, they're very close.
Mana is kind of
They
just the
don't.
best translation you can kind of give because the concept of sovereignty is not really a thing.
It's more like this, right? The actual term used was kawantaga, which basically means government or translatorship, not sovereignty, right? So it's very hard to do that, but also that the Maori control all. The word here is tuanga, which basically means, in the English text, it's basically meant to mean like possessions, right? That they get to keep their possessions. But in Maori, the term kind of also goes into other means a little bit more to treasures, which could also mean like spiritual treasures and all this. It's a fascinating case of like, this is a document that is as about as close as you can get to two languages that don't have the same vocabulary being virtually identical. Like the meaning is here, and the problem is, of course, that there's no good translations for some of these terms. It's like some of these are like, what do you mean by that? Right? So it gets complicated. Basically, it's complicated. New Zealand, though, as mentioned, is the first nation, arguably, to grant to do some of these other things.
1893, which actually puts it before most U.S. states. I think Wyoming beats it by 3 years, but that's about it.
Yeah, well, Wyoming is also one of those weird states. Like there was nobody there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, I forgot Rutherford's from there. If you're wondering, Rutherford was an early atomic chemist who, I forget if he's the one that invented the plum pudding model of the atomic shell of like the atomic figure, or if he was the one that actually designed our simplified model with the electron spinning. I think that one's the one he discovered. And by discovered, I mean he designed as a model.
Yeah, to try to explain how this is actually working, because it's like
Rutherford was an early specialist. I believe he also came up with the notion that matter is mostly empty space because he did experiments with electron beam emissions.
Yeah, in any case,
he did not discover antimatter, but basically he built like an electron ray and like zapped stuff to see if he can measure, reactions and stuff like that. Also, there are people that argue because every fucking nation on the goddamn planet likes to try to see who beat the Wright brothers.
Yeah, New Zealand at least has a interesting claim to it. It's probably not true.
It's probably mostly bullshit, but at least it's less bullshit than I can count like 20 different people that have claimed. It's less bullshit than the French. The only place that's less bullshit is the British and the Germans, who actually were almost damn near the same time.
Yeah. And in any case, when we move into here, is
my favorite is the bullshit lie of, I think there's this hilarious also series of people who invented bullshit like, oh, these people invented the jet engines, and guess what? It's mostly Balkans people saying, no, we invented the jet engine.
Yeah,
Romania in particular is really fucking guilty about that one.
Yeah, the Balkans,
although that guy at least
always
had a
trash fire.
Although that guy at least had a design. I'll give the Romanian claimant this. He did actually show like an actual.
He might not have built it yet, but he did at least have a design.
But yeah, we had physicists. They at least had early flight clubs. It had one of the stronger labor unions, actually.
Yeah.
But it didn't have TV yet in the mid-50s.
Yep, and this is what gets weirder, right?
No electromechanical computers either.
Yeah. So we also have to remember that uh, the Queen has just visited. Queen Elizabeth is doing her royal tour of all the dominions.
Which, to grant you, here's the thing. I think the last time a monarch visited New Zealand was it was probably either George the Fifth or maybe
I don't
even.
even know if they even had visited. Like,
It's possible they weren't. Like, it's entirely possible they just kind of said went to
I would
Australia and
not be
said good
surprised if
enough.
they simply said like, we'll visit Australia. Who gives a shit? Like, I'm not, I would not be surprised if that's the case because quite frankly, this whole thing is kind of fucking crazy.
But to get other things, New Zealand has no actual airport,
Yeah,
and
it's just airstrips.
if you're wondering, they don't have oil refinery. Instead, so the New Zealanders, in desperation to have self-reliance during World War II, did several things. The first is they actually mined the black sands of, I forget the name of the region, but there's a region that actually has very heavily iron, the iron sands. They would process that. They also did like shale liquefaction or some shit like that. Essentially, when Mao ordered everyone build like a little iron furnace in their little backyard to prove China's steel reliant industry. That's kind of what New Zealand did with its oil. Uh, be, and because of that, well, they just don't have a refinery. Their industry is almost non-existent.
Yeah. In any case, we just need to keep moving because we just,
Oh, they actually mentioned the Tangawai disaster. I'm not
yeah, they do.
surprised.
Because it's a huge impact to the setting
It was a
itself because
horrendous train accident. Yes.
horrific disaster. Uh,
Basically,
they
the New Zealand has a bunch of narrow gauge rail, and in particular, they had an old bridge known as Tangawai. The bridge was over the Tangawai River. The bridge collapsed due to a mudslide while a train was literally on it
yeah.
because there was a
It
heavy rainstorm weeks before, and then that side of the mountain just gave up and right all
Yeah,
over.
it was one of the largest. It is still, I think,
Most of
one
the
of the
passengers
largest
died.
train disasters of all time.
I think
And
there's
most of the
only. I think
country,
there was only the only thing that beats it is there was one accident in the United Kingdom that was worse, and it was only by slightly so.
well, it's the eighth largest at the time.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's awful.
it's less now, but it was pretty awful. The It also happened only shortly after the Queen's visit. New
Which that's
Zealand,
pretty cursed.
yeah, New Zealand is also in a weird way where it's like it looks a lot like basically every other Anglosphere nation on the planet, right?
Yep, to the
But
point where there's a reason The Shire was filmed there.
yeah, but it's got a different feel to it for sure. They go into the talk about this where basically most of the population lives either in Wellington or Auckland.
With a
At
smaller outpost in Christchurch, and that's about it.
Yes. There's of course two major islands, North Island and South Island, with the Stewart Island just below it. The New Zealand is kind of mild in the north and colder in the South Island. Uh,
And if actually, fun fact, the South Island is the Maori were noticeably more warlike, just again because that's where their crop packages damn near completely failed.
yes.
So they
The
had to be much more vicious because of it.
New Zealand is also kind of in a weird position ecologically because a lot of the native trees have actually been replaced by imported pines,
Hmm.
mostly used for paper and lumber. Marsh and swamplands were reclaimed and cleared, but it's still rather untouched by man even to this day in many ways. New Zealand is one of those kind of like strange areas of the planet where it's like the the natural world of New Zealand is very distinct from basically everywhere else on the planet. It's almost unearthly, which is again why they chose it for Middle Earth.
And
Uh,
also, again, probably why they wanted to do a Geist the Sin Eater's book here.
yeah,
Oh yeah, there was a big earthquake. Yeah, that's another thing. The place gets earthquakes not super regularly, but enough to where it's a thing.
Hmm. Because it is in fact a on a fault line, which is the Indo-Australian Pacific plates.
It's also it itself is also what's known as a microcontinent, if I recall correctly.
Yes, it is also rather volcanically active. Um, Not like super active, but active enough.
Active enough to where you should occasionally worry about a volcanic field, volcano possibly erupting minorly. Like, mild eruptions, earthquakes definitely.
Yeah.
An example is there used to be a beautiful area known as the Pink and White Terraces because of their granite cliffs, completely demolished when Mount Tarawera erupted. That's a thing that can happen.
Yep. Uh, there's a few other kind of like areas, I guess you'd say, where they,
Satan.
yeah, the Satin Satan. We'll get into that in a second here.
All right, see ya, Dark Sun. And also, hey there, Jim. So the culture of New Zealand, if you're wondering, very similar to English life, specifically English life. More provincial though, closer to the 1900s than say the 1950s. Uh,
Yeah.
if you came from Blighty, you'd say this place was fairly backwater. It'd be like going to the West Country. And the response by the New Zealanders are, well, who's this posh fuck? Because they would see you as
Yeah.
uppity.
Yeah, chill the fuck out, have a beer, relax, it's fine. And to a greater or lesser extent, that has been the nature of
Of
well, everything to do with New Zealand. It's much more chillish than almost every other Anglosphere nation
Well, I mean, there's just not
in
much there to
attitude.
do.
Yeah.
Uh, Also, at this point, American culture leaches in somewhat, mainly
Hmm.
just due to the U.S. actually give a lot of industrial influence during the Second War, and also just tourism, immigration. There's some immigration from there, trade deals.
Yeah. Almost everything is closed on Sundays, and very few are open Saturdays, and almost everything closes at night.
Oh yeah, like to give you an idea, there's a reason the joke is that it's closed. The country itself is closed. It's actually during this period, and this is another reason I think they picked this setting. It's kind of spooky because you can go through a relatively large town and it is dead.
Nobody here.
No one's outside. Lights might be off. Like you feel it feels almost like if you were not necessarily not the Will Smith I Am Legend, like the older I Am Legend book, or one of the earlier movies where you're just isolated by yourself. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
But
There's
there's also the Maori culture, which is very different, especially depending on which iwi, which is what the term. I'm actually really grateful this book did give us the term.
yeah. Where was I? Right. They also mentioned that New Zealand has some very weird artistic encounters at this point, where there's their own rock star, the Satin Satan, I think Johnny Devlin. Uh, give the older generation fits about the moral corruption of the youth. Newspapers point to the prevalence of so-called milk bar cowboys gathering in city centers, riding motorbikes and wearing leather jackets. These bodgies are the biker gangs of the day, carrying out antisocial behavior and alarming the population with motorbike races and consumption of liquor.
Again, because
Uh,
the cities used to be tend to be closed at night, so what these guys would tend to do is they would just take their motorbikes and just cause noise after curfew.
mhm.
Oh yeah,
They're also
oh
blamed
yeah,
for
it's
all that is
genuinely
wrong with
creepy.
society.
Yeah, it's genuinely creepy, Shane. Like, just imagine it's not quite sundown, and the town it's just a town of like I don't know 4,000. You're already kind of unique because you're a tourist, and they're going to talk about you from. They literally still remember the last tourist who went away 2 years ago. And then it's completely dark until you hear the ominous roar of bike engines.
Yes, there's also a. They mentioned that crimes, misdemeanors are actually much less than there was even 30 years before. Of course, it's one of those cases where, much like modern America, any crime that does happen becomes sensationalized. When in reality, we're not living in at all a time of violence,
Oh yeah,
really, when you look at historical.
also another reason they picked 54, besides the train accident, a high-profile double murder happened this year too.
No, just single murder.
Ah,
The reason why it was high profile was it was two teenage girls that murdered a mother.
I thought they were the victim. Sorry.
The Parker Holm case.
Yep. And they do the story hooks here. There's the Daughter of Heaven one, and then there's the Eternal Manor. Oh, the Eternal Mare. Sorry, for some fucking reason. Yeah, there's Herbert Foster, who was mayor for over 30 years. And he hasn't aged a day in all of those times. And he survived so many accidents, such as the fall from the train, car lost its brake, and collapse of the stage. Which is kind of
Yeah.
creepy if you think about that.
Yeah, and they're going into this one, which is quite fun. They have a few of these. Then, of course, government. They talk about New Zealand government, which is
Constitutional monarchy uses the
all you need to know about New Zealand's government is that in the 1980s, I want to think there's a prime minister who was drunk on national television and called a snap election. This actually happened. He, of course, lost the snap election, but it is to my record the only time that a prime minister has been drunk on public television and called for an election.
You know, it'd be even funnier. I think it'd be even funnier if he also kind of cajoled them, like, "Go on, vote me out, you little shits."
Yeah.
I dare you. And he starts vomiting. Oh, New Zealand. But yeah, constitutional monarchy. They use the Westminster system essentially, which has its faults and has its draws. They also have a governor general, since Dominion still. Obviously, another story hook is the royal tour. Because remember, the head of the nation, the head of the empire, is coming to this island. That's gonna awaken some spiritual shit, especially since they're recognized as subordinate to her.
Yeah.
Honestly, I think that's why they did it. There's just so many points that happened during this year. You could make at least an interesting, I wouldn't say a long saga or a long chronicle out of it, but you can do like a few sagas.
Yeah. They even go into what do things cost, and then some descriptions of the big cities. Again, you can look at this on your own if you want to, but
they go into details. Pounds divided into 20 shilling, because this is before.
Yes, this is before decimal British currency. God fucking damn it.
So, for those of you who don't know, the British economy originally did not decimalize anything.
Because the British are weird.
Well, it's because their economy is ancient.
Also because they're weird.
So, there was the pound, which was divided into 20 shillings, which, if you're wondering where the term shilling came from, I believe a pound was a particularly large coin you could cut evenly into 20 pieces. That 1/20th of a piece was a shilling. Or no, pence was, I think, the term. 12 pence was the pieces of a shilling. Because originally you would cut coins.
Yeah. So you took a coin that you divided into 20 and cut that into 12. Then you've got separate bits of that.
Because a pound is supposed to be the equivalent to gold.
Yeah. So it makes
the worst point is, do you want to know, the numbers are divided by a slash. So if you see something that's like 8 shillings and 6 pence, it's 8/6. So if you ever wondered why the Mad Hatter in Alice in Wonderland had that fucking weird sign with the fraction on it, that's the price of the hat.
Yeah. Yeah.
I am so glad I don't have to deal with this voodoo Satan economic nonsense.
It is. It
I
is
am so
the.
happy the U.S. decimalized really fucking early, and I don't have to deal with this horse shit.
We decimalized because that was the thing to do in the Age of Reason. Everything got decimalized. We tried to decimalize time.
The
It didn't
calendar as
work
well,
out.
which was amazing.
None of that worked out.
But it
I
does result in some very fun leftovers like the lobster thermidor, which is named after the Revolutionary Month.
Yeah, the French Revolutionary calendar is a completely different topic that is not at all related to New Zealand, but we have touched on briefly.
We have to touch on it because the shilling and pence and the fraction, my brain hurts.
It is the weirdest thing to have to talk about.
There's
Semi,
the hay penny, a penny,
yeah,
threepence.
threepence a bag.
Ah!
Feed the pigeons. Oh God damn it, Mary Poppins, please.
There's the sixpence, 1 shilling, 2 shilling, 2 1/2 shilling. What the fuck?
I know.
What the fuck is this? Ah!
So yeah.
Banknotes are issued in 10 shillings. Oh,
Yes.
God damn it! I hate.
All right. So when we get into this, they go and they talk about like Auckland is now becoming a motorized town. By the way, they mentioned that, which is, as we all know, cars are the tools of Satan.
And we're the country that still uses the imperial system. Oh, that's dog shit too, but it's not quite as bad.
The imperial system, at the very least, the imperial system has somewhat logical division points. It's usually like by fours.
Yeah,
Right?
it's not as good as the metric. Well, I'll be fair, it's not quite as
completely
good.
random and arbitrary, but
But there is
so was metric.
But there is a sort of almost logic to it.
Yeah, you can't convert things very easily.
It's not quite logic. It's still wrong. It's still doing lines of coke in the bathroom, but at least it's not overdosing on LSD laced with rat poison in the dumpster out back like this fucking nonsense.
This is one of those things where it's just like, how the fuck did anyone go along with this for as long as they did?
Like, to give you an idea, the U.S. actually originally had a halfpenny too. We got rid of it for obvious reasons.
We got rid of it because we were like, this is some real fucking bullshit, and it doesn't make any sense.
Also, they're completely worthless in 1852.
Yeah, again, we had halfpennies that long.
I think we had halfpennies until like the mid 19th century, when it was like, there's no point.
Yeah, because it's like no one's pricing it anyway. There's anyway, they go
because
in,
there was a movement to get the metric system working and it failed. I think it was due to something really stupid.
It was due to communism, I think, was the actual reason why people were
yeah.
John Birch Society or something managed to spread the fucking conspiracy theory that the metric system would lead to us adopting communism or something.
Yeah, because it was being pushed in the early
bullshit
50s.
like
It was supposed to be like we were musing on doing it in the 50s, and then and then that happened, and then we just never got around to it.
And we tried briefly tried in the 70s, and then that got
tried
abandoned.
again in the 90s,
and it's probably never going to happen again. Which it means we have the weird, we're going to have the weird units for forever.
Oh, the second time. Oh, it's because France had a Okay. The first time we actually considered it, but then Robespierre went nuts. The second time was communism, and then the third and fourth time was not enough people cared.
Yeah. There's still people in the rural U.S. who I've seen that had we're talking about how teaching the metric system was in scientific classes was either pointless or like an example of like the liberal corruption of our youth.
Yeah,
I'm serious.
Do they live in a compound?
No, that's just rural America for you.
Yeah, so I just to give examples of earnings, £8 a week was a weekly wage at the time, and then here's all of the devil mechanics: 7 pence for a dozen eggs. Just to give ideas. So notable locations. There's Auckland, which is on I think it's on the
Yeah,
South Island.
it's on South Island. I'm pretty sure it's like on the northern part of the South Island.
I don't
Uh,
remember. I'd have to look at I don't remember. I think Wellington's North Island. I think Auckland's South. It's the largest population in the country. It's been the capital. Oh no, Auckland is North Island then, I think.
Yeah, it is North Island.
I
Okay.
am okay. So it's the largest city.
Hooray! It's the largest
Oh,
city. It was the capital
Christchurch is
for
on the
a
South
while.
Island. There we
Christchurch
go.
is the South Island one, yes.
There's
Then
Waikato.
because Wellington's the one that's in
south
between
part,
the two islands. I was mixing up. We were mixing all three up, for God's sake. God's own country, everyone.
God's own country.
In any case, they talk about like the various
Auckland's pretty
other
big.
areas.
It's
Auckland,
home to their art industry. It's basically the center of everything. It's the most modern city. If it wasn't for the fact they don't have television, this would be one of the few places that would have TV.
Yeah, there's also, of course, the Waikato, which is like the
When are Americans going to get rid of the penny? We've honestly been trying to get rid of it for a while.
Never. It's going to be used forever because it's a decimal fraction system. It's useful.
The problem is it costs more to make than it actually.
Yes, it does. It does, but it's still quite useful as a unit of currency.
And that's why there is enough people that say exactly that, even though it's pretty much worthless. Yeah, Canada got rid of the penny.
Yes, but do you really want to be like the Canadians?
Leave people to die of stroke and heart attacks in favor of those who overdosed? You make an excellent point.
Anyway, they go and talk about, again, North Island, Wellington,
yeah, Waikato's the bread basket.
Otago,
that's where all the things. Hawke's Bay is, yeah.
Otago. There's all this. And they finally get to what's to come. New Zealand kind of has a weird course after this in about a decade. The New Zealand
the asylum. They did have a mental asylum.
Yes. New Zealand participates actually in the Vietnam War. They are brought in by the CEDAW Treaty to some degree, along with the Australians.
If I recall correctly,
this is incredibly unpopular at home for the reason of it seems completely pointless to the New Zealanders from the start. They have it basically cements the idea of neutrality to a greater or lesser extent.
Mainly because this war was pretty much pointless.
It was not only pointless, but it was also just not in New Zealand's national interest to fight it.
Especially since at this point the military is quite a bit of money.
It is, and to the degree where New Zealand still has a small military, but it's not very big. They have basically no navy, no air force at this point. Which actually
they have a navy, but it's like a couple of a few patrol boats.
Yeah,
they might have a small corvette, and that's about it.
Well,
the corvettes that show the flag and the patrol boats and small helicopter air force to just watch the coasts.
Their air force is literally like search and rescue craft,
a couple of search and rescue crafts
anti-submarine
and helicopters.
That's basically it at this point. Which makes sense when you consider the amount of ocean that New Zealand needs to cover as part of their search and rescue operations.
Yeah, basically, their Navy and Air Force's purpose, they might have one boat to show the flag, like a warship to show the flag, just one. And then the rest of it is mostly just patrol boats and support services.
Yeah.
Like helicopters. Back in the day, it would have been float planes, like in the 60s and
transportation
50s.
Also, there's several more transportation disasters inside of New Zealand. And in many cases, there's international incidents with the United States over potential nuclear depth charges on one of our boats that was being sent there. There's that one ship that was sunk by the French.
Yes, the destroyers of Greenpeace.
Yeah, which to be quite fair, it was one of the most pointless and dangerous naval operations of all time because it's like there's literally no point of sinking it.
No, there's a big point in sinking it. It's because it's owned by Greenpeace.
Yeah, the
No,
justifications.
you don't understand. That is the only justification you need. I'm joking.
Yeah, like I think they killed a couple people with it.
And that's why it was completely fucking insane.
Yeah. They of course kind of go into the next bit, which is that all right, so New Zealand's spooky shit is a bit different. Because New Zealand is in a weird position where it was literally uncolonized for 400 until like about half,
The
like half a millennium.
1300s.
The spiritual landscape is probably the most affected by the first people who were there.
Destroyers of Greenpeace sounds like a giant farce. Shane, and unironically, sounds like something Mel Brooks would direct back in the 70s.
The whole incident with that ship
It is a
is
gigantic. It is. If you told me this like was a thing and I didn't know it happened, I would have said, "What is this? The sequel to Operation Canadian Bacon?"
yeah, like it makes no sense to do it where they did
It
it.
feels like something that the people who made Operation Canadian Bacon would have done.
Yeah,
Which,
it's
if you're wondering if anyone's not seen it, the film, actually, because it's related to Canada, very unpopular American president decides to try to stage an invasion of Canada to shore up his collapsing fucking approval ratings. It doesn't go well. I think it culminates in the buffoon, the buffoon protagonist actually managing to force the U.S. to surrender in a humiliating way to Canada, which is hilarious. Oh man, it's been a while since I've seen that film. It was funny.
no matter how you look at it though, like it's
They
the
have
land
ghost
itself is very
hurricanes.
different. Yeah, they have fucking ghost hurricanes, right? Essentially,
Hurricanes,
for whatever
cyclones,
reason,
monsoons. They're the same things. They're a cyclonic storm that forms due to, yeah.
basically the maelstrom. This I guess it was simple. As a result of tremendous emotional energies that built up over time, have bled out from the living in the pursuit of prosperity or fed by cultural conflict. A section of the underworld is effectively migrated over into the realm of the living. Dangerous psychic storms are arising around the nation as a result, forming bottlenecks to the underworld proper, which results in spooky shit going everywhere.
Which is the result of New Zealand rapidly exploding in population.
Partially result of that, the result of a rapid shift in culture,
And a
like
rapid shift in
extremely
the amount of
rapid.
people who died during the war.
Yeah, and also just
Oh yeah, Michael Moore. That's like the only Michael Moore movie that he made that I liked. I liked Canadian Bacon. It was funny. Wasn't great, but it was entertaining.
so they go in and say that like the spirits are also affected by this. It's not just the ghosts. It's also spirits. So with all the ghosts failing to go into the underworld, usually carrying negative energy, it's created a feedback loop where like the soul stuff is basically like the underworld is intruding into the twilight. So it goes absolutely fucking nuts. So going out to sea, you're
You're inviting
probably
getting sucked into the ghost storm.
yeah, as you're gonna enter, you're gonna get fucked up by the ghost storm if you're a sin eater. So you're kind of stuck here. The maelstrom seems to extend at least half a mile upwards. Sin eaters taking international flights by airplane report feeling as if their souls are being ripped out of their bodies and their geists fight to remain coherent.
If you're wondering, Sin Eaters, the way they actually stat it out, it's considered an extreme environment. It only affects those touched by the shadow, underworld, and twilight. It
So
looks like a storm in those areas.
basically, demons to some degree, uh, werewolves, and the Geists. That's basically the people who are affected by this.
And they take a -2 dice penalty to all actions.
If they're inside of that maelstrom, yes.
On top of that, it strengthens Invernian gates, which are sinkholes to the underworld, and makes it harder to open or create new ones.
Yes, which becomes a problem because they're supposed to open and close naturally. That's what they do.
So ghosts are building up.
Yeah, because there's only a few of these, and all of a sudden there's a lot more people, and there's a lot more stuff going on here, and oh god, the supernatural toilet is clogged.
What doesn't help is there's also abilities like lull the winds, where you have to learn how to basically get the ghost hurricane to calm down.
Yeah, yo, Ghost Hurricane, fucking chill.
There's the
Uh,
Kahwa. These are the human ghosts.
these are the ghosts of Maori tradition, and the human ghosts of the island, which are actually affected by the nature of the underworld here. Since the turn of the century has been when this really started to kick off.
Especially since religion changed pretty heavily too around that
Yeah,
time.
every passing year since the turn of the century, ghosts bearing all the emotional energy of living have lingered longer and longer, forming chokeholds at basically where they are. The weird thing is that most of these are rank 1, and they're more often than not dominated by more malicious spirits, which are the kahua, which were mentioned earlier, right? Uh, which are the more human ghosts. These are usually about rank 2, and since they haven't gotten to the underworld, the conditions are basically such that because it's such a prosperous area, it's harder for these ghosts to just accept that I'm fucking dead, I need to move on. So they're farming out these weaker spirits essentially, and you could almost say they're colonizing the start of the afterlife for essence. Essence from later go like basically they realize they can steal our harvest essence, right? And they're fighting spirits over the essence that is being generated by all these lesser ghosts, which is kind of fucking funny.
It's even creepier too because they don't need anchors to. There's
Right,
nothing
because there's
holding
so
them
much yeah, because there's so much essence floating around New
due to
Zealand at
the
this point.
hurricane and the gates not opening right.
The gates not opening, the general mood of the country at this time, there's a lot of emotional turmoil. There's a lot of like stuff that's generating essence basically. That yeah, you it's in essence feast. So all these negative emotional energies are also spilling out over and all that, which then means that if you are a your standard ghost right now, right, it's kind of just nuts. A lot of these ghosts are also unanchored or unfettered, which means that you have to basically banish them. You can't just find their anchor and use that as a bargaining tool. You actually have to go and beat the shit out of them.
You have to
Uh,
punch the ghost into submission.
you have to become that guy on Fit who punched a ghost.
Or in
This
the
is
Hunter Chronicles we did, that cop that shot the fucking ghost.
shot the ghost in the fucking head. Yeah. They then there's the bound, which is basically that the sin eaters are rare, and usually geists don't show up too often. But once they do get created, usually the geists themselves are sticking around because right now this place is a fucking mess. And
Yeah, it's
geists,
a
of course, have
trash
their
fire.
own geists, of course, have their own agendas. A lot of the time they want to move on as well, but a lot of the time they also want to stick around too. And the reason why they're offering the contract, right, is so that they can experience life again.
And this is
Uh,
reflected in the Atua, which in this case, the geists that you make a deal with here, noticeably more selfish.
than often elsewhere,
And they
because
always have,
they
like, geists always have their own ulterior motives.
agendas
These
and
guys
are
are
yeah.
worse.
These guys are more often like that. The main thing with this is that these are as mentioned before, geists come from ghosts. In some way, shape, or form, they have become a different thing on a different level, the little gods of death, basically. And in New Zealand, because of the cultural implications from the Maori, from all this sort of stuff, they realize that more. So, for example, some of these go on to try to
Form
influence the
cults.
mortal realm more than they want to make a contract with a sin eater, because they don't need a physical body in order to interact with the world, because there's still that strong tradition of like
Especially
the talking
since
with the
they often
spirits.
take up the form of mortuary cults.
Yes, which are an important part of many Polynesian cultures. or at the very least, like the honoring of the
So
dead in some way, shape, or form.
you're not giving them body. You might just be their agent doing weird power games with other Atua.
And feeding them essence or plasm or whatever power, basically. So there's plenty of them that just don't need a Sin Eater. They're free
And
agents.
if they get one, it's not to puppet them. It's literally just you're my
It's a
guy that I
contract.
hire. Yeah.
It's a contract. They're making a contract with you to become a magical girl and go out and purge evil.
Okay.
Also, they're going to eat the evil.
Magical girl, but if instead of the stupid cat, it's like Ryuk from Death Note.
It's like well, no, it's just Madoka. Like, have you not seen
yeah.
Madoka? Because it's like cutie.
I just know
all cute. It's all cute and friendly, and then it fucking eats a person.
Yeah.
You know, like,
because it's a subversion of magical girls, and it's all dark and miserable.
yeah, welcome to the world of darkness.
Yeah.
Like, anybody that says, "Oh yeah, Princess the Hopeful," that just fucking play a Sin Eater. A Geist is basically like a fucking weird eldritch abomination horror that is giving you magical powers.
Also, straight up, Genius through Transgression doesn't need to be used anymore due to Deviant the Renegade.
Yeah. I mean, if you still want to run it, I'm still like, well, you could just play Mage or
Mage
Deviant.
Mage,
I never saw the appeal of
Mage.
either.
You can play Princess a Technocratic Mage too, yeah.
I mean, Princess is basically just like, hello, yes, I want to play Mage without actually playing Mage. Like, go fuck yourself. Just play Mage. Mage is good. Mage is love. Mage is life.
Another thing about Achuas are they're not necessarily Maoris. A lot of them are actually European ghosts.
Again, it's just the nature of what they are has been changed by the spiritual landscape of New Zealand at this time.
Oh no, it's just I don't really care about Madoka. It doesn't just deconstruct. It does the other thing. It does the thing modern entertainment usually forgets about, which is you're supposed to then build back up from that point, and in a way that's actually better. Or you either reaffirm it, like Star Trek Deep Space Nine did that. You either reaffirm the original message in a stronger and more nuanced way, or you go with a new concept, which is what Madoka did, and it's in a way that you actually like.
Or you actually are trying to tell. They also mentioned that there are basically no large Sin Eater organizations in New Zealand.
Oh, is there a new compact of those for Hunter? Okay, so that's even more pointless to play Princess then. You just play that compact of Hunters.
Yeah, there's a lot of shit that just is like, why are you?
So I already forgot what Koaka, their term for saying. I'm gonna be honest, I'm gonna forget this by the end. I'm sorry.
I know it's all like, oh god, because from time to time there are those that tend to form around just European concepts, but they tend to be more isolated, or they link up with another one that has these terms and are using them kind of interchangeably, because it's like Sin Eater culture, especially in first edition, is very weird and very fluid. Which makes sense because in first edition you could have a group of like, oh yeah, our Geists are all archangels or some shit, or it's like, whatever. First edition.
Unironically, you could totally have Geist Sin Eaters. Just you take the Scooby Doo gang. Unironically,
they work pretty well as Sin Eaters, actually.
Like even the dog, yeah, you could have a dog Sin Eater. Fuck it. The Geist is you have a possessed dog. There you go. Come on, don't you like it?
I mean, I kind of do, but at the same time,
either that or you just have a mostly lupine werewolf as their friend.
Yeah,
like they're just in dog form most of the time.
Yeah, the fun bit about this, right, is they talk about, okay, the two main groups are the Railway Battalion, which is formed under Edward Ned Poindexter, who's basically created a club used to monitor the railways, because it's like, well, they're the main transportation.
Literally,
the train accidents happen. There's other ghost clusters
and
around.
And there were prior accidents before, and it's not a testament on how bad. It's a bit geologically unstable, and it's narrow gauge railway because it's easier to build, and as a result,
yeah. Also, to clear the goddamn railway of the goddamn ghost. That's literally his job. That's what he's put upon
Fuck off,
himself.
Ghost! And the Ghost is
Fuck
like,
off,
no.
ghost. Get off the rail tracks.
And then the Theosophical Suffrage Society, which, yeah.
Yeah. So, there's also his stats, which is fun. His is named after a tree. He's actually a relatively powerful Sin Eater, which makes some sense because he's been around for
20
a
years.
decent amount of time. He's at Synergy 5, which is like their morality stat, kind of. I'm trying to remember what the power stat was. Psych. That was it. Yeah, 5. So he's a pretty decently strong Sin Eater. Then you get that doesn't have to spend a bunch of time in the underworld, at least. Then you get the Theosophical Society. They're kind of much more boring than get the fuck off the tracks. The trains coming through the group, which I'm going to be 100% honest, is a much better group for a Sin Eater game than you can imagine, as it combines the autism of both RPGs and trains.
I got
there will
something
be someone in
funnier.
your group who will know everything about the New Zealand rail network or something like that, and they will autistically spurg at you about no, this is the model of locomotive that was in New Zealand at this time, because there are people like that.
No, I was thinking another thing the railway guys can do is I'm just envisioning like Ned like completely done with life in a little motorboat going to a small cruise line, like one of those small ocean liners. It's being mired in a storm. And he just like he goes up to the ocean liner in the storm and he begins screaming at it, "Fuck off, Ghost!" Like just imagine you have to get on an ocean liner because it's kind of stuck in a storm in port, and it's like you have to scream at the ghosts to fuck off to get the hurricane to go away.
Yeah, ghost shatters.
The
But yeah,
railway guys are more fun. This is more of your
this is more of your classic
secret society, secret club society for women.
Yeah, and it's
Men
interesting.
have been introduced recently, but it's still mostly a woman's club.
It's interesting, but it's not really like super interesting. And then they go on to the
if you've
Toowoomba.
if you've dealt with like a Masonic lounge or just like a club society like Skulls and Cross,
Yeah,
it's that, but with a bit more of the occult, a bit more of the odd. Someone almost certainly will show up dressed as like a Turkish person in like the most stereotypical way possible, like that sort of society.
yeah. Moving on from that, there is the actual talk about what the hell did the Maori actually do? Because the Maori have shaped the spiritual landscape of New Zealand so much, they're relatively important and they're going to matter to you.
Because they formed the bedrock of how their underworld works, just because it was untouched by man until they came.
Yeah. They have the nature of it down.
That's kind of why they use so many of the terms, because this is the bedrock. And unironically, the storm and breaking is mainly because that bedrock is shifting because Europeans.
Yeah.
The traditions are changing.
They say that there are Sin Eaters who become these Toowoomba, but not all the Toowoomba are Sin Eaters, obviously.
They're basically people who specialize in telling ghosts to fuck off.
Yes, they're basically. They mention they're the equivalent of mystery cult initiates, religious leaders, educators armed with lore and status within Maori society. These are like the guys that talk about all this sort of stuff.
They're your combination Ghostbuster, witch doctor, and scientist.
And cultural expert.
Yep.
Yeah. There are.
They have at least 5 hats.
Yeah, and also they don't like to always share their knowledge with Europeans, which is no surprise, because who does?
Especially
fuck off,
since
anthropologist side. You're just gonna write about my culture in the weirdest fucking way. I actually believe this shit, even if you don't.
Well, no, there's also the problem that it wasn't until around this period of time that you'd have people. It's like, I genuinely want to know, and then they write it in the most like biased and bullshit way.
Biased bullshit way, rather than here is what they believe. This is why they do this. We're not judging them for any reason, which is more modern anthropology.
Yeah, because earlier anthropology had some really stupid ones.
These savages believe that blah 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 because of their foolish ways, and you're like
let's say there's a tribe in Africa. I'm making it up that one of their chief spirits is known as Iwataki, which is a trickster deity that often basically it's the what's his name? It's like Anasazi, where it's like a trickster deity in the form of like a spider monkey. It's like these savages worship the monkey. When it's like no, it's just his avatar takes the form of of this spider monkey, and as a result, we think that they're kind of a sacred creature. We don't fucking worship the little monkey.
Of course, the anthropologist then writes down, they worship monkeys and are savage beast men. Where it's just like
they're savage
put on the
beastmen
most
that wear faces of monsters, and they're like, no, they're not the
No,
faces
that
of
is
monsters. They are the representations of our founding spirit.
yeah.
The
It's like
faces of monsters.
you fucking shit. Please stop. You're getting this all
They
wrong.
bathe themselves in blood. No, we fucking don't. It's a New Year marking to indicate health.
Yeah, it's like all this. It's like you know how like I think we mentioned it in our Rome one where it's like the Romans when talking about the early Christians are like, yeah, they're fucking cannibals. It's like that where it's like well, mind you, the Maori were actually cannibalistic, but it wasn't like in the same way that
They
you would
believed if
expect.
they chanted enough, bullets could stop them. No, it's to indicate luck before a battle.
Yeah,
It's a mantra
it's
so
not
that
actually that we believe that this is going to stop bullets. This is we're
we're
trying to
hoping that they
the
miss.
bullets
It's
don't hit
luck.
us. Yeah,
It's for
it's
luck.
luck. It's for good luck and yeah.
That like this is just out of that period. Like World War II kind of made that
Oh,
type of anthropology poisonous.
it was starting to go away finally. Yeah. Uh,
so
but yeah,
they're still pretty cagey, especially since more than once I think the Maori have been compared to was it the Fijians, which were known to actually
which
be
were
cannibals.
actually fully cannibalistic. The Maori would only occasionally like eat the heart of someone they killed.
And that was mostly a Southlander tradition. The northern tribes didn't do that.
Yeah, and mind you,
Or
doing
no,
that
it's
was
not.
also a
No,
sign of
I could
like,
be wrong, but like only a few of the iwi did that.
and also of course they are. It is a sign of the ultimate respect, basically, of like you are so rad.
You're so
I'm
rad.
eating
I
your
want
heart,
some of your power
and
through
so I
me.
gain your powers. Yeah, which it's metal as fuck.
But like
Uh,
that's the level of ignorance that they're working from.
that's the sort of cultural context you have to remember.
So that's why the Dunga are like, I don't want you to like you're gonna say I worship death or something stupid like that.
Yeah, like that there were cannibals for the pleasure of it. No, it's like no, we're cannibals for very specific reasons. This isn't like a super common behavior. It's like funerary cannibalism, like which is also something that happens in like islands in Southeast Asia sometimes, where it's
Oh yeah,
like
yeah. In
basically
fact,
you'll eat part of the dead relative as like a as a funerary rite.
it's actually well known among the Melanesian tribes of Papua New Guinea to the point where a specific prion disease unfortunately formed because of it.
Yeah,
It's known as
it, it's
kuru.
it, yeah, it's literally one of those just like, oh
It's
yeah, that's
actually
a weird thing.
unfortunate for them because it basically got the government to ban their mortuary cannibalism because
Yeah, yeah,
they're not
which
happy
again,
about it, but they also understand it.
yeah, mortuary cannibalism is a very weird thing that has occurred in human cultures for basically ever. Uh, and sometimes it's literally like, oh yeah, we're starving, so I guess eating someone's okay.
Sometimes that's the An Lushan rebellion where it's like the soldiers wept, they did not want to eat. The commander ordered them to eat.
Yeah, it's like there's no other fucking food. We need to eat the dead. Uh, which is the most common form of human cannibalism. There's ritual cannibalism. There's not really any. There's very few cultures that practice cannibalism as like a no, we're doing this because we want to eat people.
Like even the
Like
Fijians, which were notorious for it, didn't do it because they wanted to.
it was for very specific reasons that they were doing it. Namely, it's like this is either I can't remember for the Fijians, was it to basically obliterate the soul?
I think it was because if you fought them, it was their way of saying it's their way of saying fuck around and find out.
Yeah, I think it's like related to like this is the ultimate humiliation or something like that.
Basically,
Like
the Fijians, they were relatively warlike, but they had a very strong ethos of fuck around and find out when people challenged them.
they also ate several missionaries. Um,
Yeah.
so your mileage may vary on that one. Uh,
Anyway,
when
here's
we
one of the
one of the Tonga, they go into, it's like, yeah, there's kind of one of those things where it's like a lot of this is it's oral tradition still.
because they did not to give you an idea, I believe the missionaries had to actually make a language for them. Well, writing
A
script for
writing
them.
system, yes.
I didn't mean like spoken. I meant written.
Yeah,
It's similar to how Cyrillic is the result of a Greek missionary trying to get the Slavs to like figure out how to
typically the
transcribe their
Bulgarians.
devil language to work.
Yeah, how do we make the devil language work? I
Meanwhile,
know.
the
Let's.
Poles are like, we're just going to break the Latin script until it fucking works.
Yeah, fucking Polish, man. It's not as bad as Finnish. Finnish is like,
There is one name in Polish that's absolutely hilarious. It's like of in Poland. It's mostly R's, G's, R's, Z's, and Y's with a couple of O's thrown in.
yeah.
It is a glorious nightmare name. To give you an idea, that name, I believe it was a shit post because it was their way of figuring out like if there were German Abwehr double agents during World War II in the Polish resistance. Can they say this name?
Yeah.
If they could, they were Polish.
Yeah, there's a few other like really wonky ones. But in any case, they talk about like all the kind of the ideas. This guy is actually kind of trying to. They mentioned he's going to try to make a contract with the Bound, like a Geist at some point, which is a weird thing because it's like you don't necessarily have to die to do it, technically speaking. If you do, because
It's
they
just
are
it's much
still
more likely
spirits
to
and
happen.
ghosts. It's just that, yeah, you could make a contract with them. It's just that, like, would they accept it? The answer to that is probably no. Um, quite frankly,
Mainly
if you are
because if you're almost dead, that gives them enough leverage where it becomes a more even arrangement.
yeah,
That's usually why they go towards you if you're dying because
it's also because they want a physical body,
mhm,
and to some degree.
you'd have to find one willing to pick one up, which is going to be an issue in New Zealand since they are strong enough to not need one.
Yeah, for example, there's one that made a deal with him where they gave him this guy. They gave him actually second sight, the Geist, which is an interesting way to have that happen. He is not planning on doing anything rash to bind himself with basically a Geist, but he's putting together enough pieces that he might try to force a bond, which could go very badly.
By the way, Jim has found the compact, but as he's going to explain it, then there's the Taniwa. So ghosts are the human spirits that linger. They also are sometimes spirits that have eaten so many human ghosts they basically become a ghost.
Yeah,
Basically, spirits are different. They are forces of nature's abstraction, places that have events happen, just cultural zeitgeist sort of thing. And among the Maori, they usually take the form of their volcanic mountains, rivers, hills, places where
yeah.
bad juju happens,
They
and
also
they're
are
quite powerful.
interesting. They're interesting in that they will consume lesser spirits, but they're also considered themselves guardians of areas. So they often will adopt insect or bird-like traits depending on their residence and other traits. Sometimes whales, octopi, squids, basically big, powerful entities to reflect what they are. They can speak Maori and Polynesian, obviously, because that's what they've been around the most. But they're also not unknown to be fluent in English because they'll pick it up. Spirits are weird. They can talk to you in languages that don't even exist because they have their own language that doesn't exist.
And because they're more neutral, spirits usually cause many problems when they form, just because they want to basically repeat the thing that gives them their stimuli.
Well, these guys can get stimuli from a bunch of other shit, so why should
So
they be mad half the time?
so yeah, they're not angry and they're not causing too much havoc. If they cause havoc, it's just kind of a
If they cause
coincidental.
havoc, things are fucked in the area. They mention here.
But yeah, because of that, they actually have like full-on servants. They don't need to do things like possession or guide people using essence or whatever. They, no, they're just
they'll grab a couple of like animals and then talk to you through them or through people. And of course it's noticed, and it's generally one of those things where it's like they'll list the conditions, what they have, what's going on, and what they will do to fuck you up if you cross them.
And on top of
They're
that, they don't really cause too much havoc unless someone's annoyed them to the point where they need to.
yeah. It's only when the location
They're
really is
very innocuous by spirit standards.
yeah.
Because to give you an idea, spirits when they appear elsewhere, since they need one type of kind of emotion or concept to gain energy, they usually absorb it to the detriment of others. Like a joy spirit will cause legitimate rapturous, like insane cult behaviors or rise
Or
in drug
addictions.
abuse.
Yeah.
Religious
Because
revivalism. You can unironically have a happy ghost accidentally create a weird, like crazy free love psycho cult.
yeah, pretty fairy guard. That's fucking storyteller vault bullshit.
Like not straight, like it's not innately evil. It's just
Yeah. Sorry, I was talking about the thing that was linked in the Discord for that. I'm not interested in a conspiracy for that sort of bullshit, because it's like there's better ways to do fake conspiracies. That's
So,
ugh.
and if you're wondering, we do have our Discord. It is in the link, and that's where you can find things like the conspiracy of magical girls, which is apparently a fake conspiracy.
Apparently, and it's also on Storyteller Vault, which there's
Can
good stuff there, and then there's this.
can you clarify?
Storyteller Vault is like linked to Drive-Thru RPG. It is the way that White Wolf / Paradox / Onyx Path has set up so that you can self-publish aspects of game books for.
Self-publish.
Yeah, so the quality can range from very, very good, where it was done by people who were like, well, we can't actually get this as like a published book, but we can do this on our own time.
Like here's a particularly interesting setting on Greenlandic Viking era Geist, where it's like you're the last one walking after the settlement perishes.
More like, hey, here's an update to second edition of all of the bloodlines that were ever made. I did this in my free time. Here, please pay me $3
here's a
for it.
refluffing of Vampire the Requiem second edition's covenants, so that they're a little better fleshed out.
Yeah, or here is Requiem for Rome, updated to second edition with a new plotline, reflecting the changes that we have to the setting since that book was published. And it's like, okay, like that's good stuff. And then there's this.
I didn't know you
Anyway.
hated magical girls that much.
Okay, I don't hate magical girls. I just think that magical girls don't really work as like whatever the fuck this is.
Okay, so what's your thoughts if you unironically decided to have a hunter compact that are just the fucking Power Rangers?
I would call that just, hey, you're just playing Werewolf the Apocalypse. Go Mighty Morphin Gaia Rangers.
Or, I mean, that could also be something really stupid.
Unironically, the Japanese source book, I know this is a diatribe, the Japanese source book of the changing breeds for that starts out with, I shit you not, a joke Super Sentai comic. I own this book. I can bring it out. I can show you pictures. It's real. It exists. That was done back in the 90s when White Wolf was on fucking drugs.
This is the period of White Wolf that's like, what would be great if we had Heinrich Himmler, leader of the
as a vampire. Yeah. God bless you, old White Wolf. May you never ever happen again.
Let's also invent White Heaven, Black Heaven, and Asian Heaven.
And they're all separate for no explicable reason.
Separate but equal heavens.
Yes, the afterlife is in fact segregationist. George Wallace is very happy.
When George Wallace died, he was so happy to make it into White Heaven. No. God
Uncle
sent
Ruckus
him.
Made it into White Heaven in White Wolf.
No. And George Wallace was punished by being sent to Black Heaven by God.
Oh no. So okay,
that's his version of hell.
So they then go into like, okay, here's all the weird spirit folk that are connected to the shadow and to the underworld.
Yeah, like check out this Tanawa here.
Yeah.
Yeah,
This guy's
they're
fine.
big. They're big and powerful.
Yeah. And then here's the taboo
Essence
stuff.
20.
Yeah. Then they talk about this right here, right? So the taboo, the sacred law, basically the taboo, right? It's common. It's literally the term taboo comes from Southeast Asia and Polynesia.
Mhm.
If it's taboo, it must be left alone. So they had kind of like a thing where before the arrival here, a lot of taboos are very practical. It's basically an idea of like this is something we avoid because we've had bad experiences with it in the past, so we're just not going to risk it.
Like
Uh,
don't eat this snake. It's poison.
yeah.
Or
It also,
avoid that river north. Do not go across the river because the lands there are filled with a disease because like mosquitoes live there and there's some horrible disease
yeah.
from
Uh,
that area.
these taboos are oftentimes actually powerful in the spiritual world of New Zealand.
Because
And they can,
belief gives power, and this applies to
yes.
ghosts and
So common
spirits.
restrictions are often things like cannot be eaten, cannot be touched, cannot be spoken of, cannot be looked upon, cannot be removed, and so on. And oftentimes things that happen are mental anguish and despair, boils, intestinal distress, paralysis, unconsciousness, wanting to leave the area. Taboos are very
There's a
powerful.
warning area, and
Yeah,
they're charged with essence.
yeah. You can actually create one. Here's the ritual for it. And if you can actually, as a Sin Eater, create a taboo area for various things, which is kind of
Ghost
neat.
Hurricane can break them though.
Yes. Now, of course, then they go into the spirit folk of New Zealand, which are the Pakeha, which are the pale white people, which are named after the Piatapure, which are the mountain fairies, which we have a stat line for here. They are assholes, basically.
So are these their take on the different critters?
Yes.
I mean, I will say this is much more creative. Like, there's entire like, the last time they were this creative, I think, was Aztec Skinwalker.
Where they went into the actual details of the culture involved. Yeah.
Well, not only that, but like, I think they statted more stuff like this too in that one.
Yes. I like this one where it's like, hey, here's a mountain fairy. It's a rank 2 spirit, has about 15 essence. It has powerful attributes, a decent amount of health and
And they
willpower and initiative.
love to cause havoc.
Yeah, they literally dement and mortal mass. They can pretend to be people. They are influencing forests and all that sort of stuff. They materialize. They can releach. They can form in twilight. Their banes are firelight or bright sunlight. And they also cannot enter a site that is made taboo. What does this remind you of?
They're emotional vampires, basically. Yeah.
Yes. This is one of those other things where I go back to my grand conspiracy of the World of Darkness. Regarding like the nature of the World of Darkness as like at least the new world of everything is fucking connected.
You didn't connect shit. They're connected.
They're connected, yeah. Well, it's like the Strix, right? They're a lot like the Strix. They can materialize, they can dement, they can take a mortal mask, they can imitate a person basically. Their banes are firelight and bright sunlight, and they avoid taboos. That's very similar to Strix.
And then there's the Ponaturi, which are seagoing relatives of them.
There's spooky ghosts that run along the shore.
So they also are fucked over by sunlight.
Yeah. Bright Sire Funlight and Blessed Fishing Nets. Then there's the last one, which are these underworld creatures known as Kahakuko or whatever.
Go.
Yeah. They're deathly white figures, skin tight upon bones, mouth unnaturally wide. They often have red hair or are hairless. They're drawn to sites where innocents or childlike individuals have suffered and died. To torment the living relatives and extract more despair. They are afraid of light and fire, and most locations can be warded against them by flooding the spaces with as much bright light as possible or having the right taboo installed. So like nursery room versions of this, which can do a lot of spooky shit. Then they go on into more details of like, okay, so here's how you actually would want to play in this. So they talk about like, what's your background? Are you born in the city or are you born in the outside? And that's a very different sort of thing. There's also the ethnic and cultural considerations of the fact that like more Maori are here than there have ever been Westerners at this point. So a tendency is that Geist and spirits imitate what is around, so they'll imitate that spiritual resonance of the Maori.
Bless you. Well, it was my attempt to say cow.
Yeah. In any case, they
They have a variety of archetypes. There's your gatekeepers, advocates, necromancers,
this is talking
celebrants.
about
Yeah,
like the archetypal roles. Again, this is very firmly first edition, which is the archetypes and thresholds. They're different in second. They talk about like the thresholds. There's stuff like the Forgotten, which is like lightning strikes and
horrible accidents that just come
accidents
out of nowhere.
and all that.
Victims, prayer victims, usually due to someone else's antics
The
or
natural
animals.
world in some way, like exposure deaths, wild animals killing you. They basically say venomous creatures really don't exist aside from one fucking spider. So, you know, starvation and hunger are not common to causes of death, but alcoholism, drug abuse, and tobacco are often the silent. Suicide is oftentimes also a cause for being silent.
And then there's the stricken caused by disease, and the torn, which are those who might have died in the war.
Yeah. Sin Eater traits that talk about like, okay, here's some updates to how does like certain keys work and all that. It's pretty simple stuff. Then they talk about, okay, your life is a bit different than normal. You can't actually like with travel in New Zealand, it's actually very tricky to do right now.
Mainly because there's it's very much you're stuck where you are. Just due to infrastructure.
You might have to use a train or truck to get around, or maybe a bus. There's
no airport, so you're stuck here, buddy.
Yeah, there's kind of the thing where it's like there's not a lot of Spinagers here. There's probably 30 to 40 across the entire nation of 2 million.
And on top of that, like unless you're in Wellington, Auckland, or Christchurch, you're not going to make a group. You're probably going to be the only one out there.
Yeah.
Which is another reason I think this book is a little odd, since you can't really get much of, like, for a group, it wouldn't really work.
I think it would work for a group, but it's just like
you'd have to only have maybe 2 at most. You'd have to probably mostly make them mortals, I think.
Yeah, which is an interesting way to run a Geist game, honestly. But it's like it could be worse, really, for sure.
Yeah, getting together is a pain in the ass, but it can happen.
Yeah, there's also like they talk about like their markets, their all this other stuff that's more first edition idea of senior culture. Then they get into like setting the story here where it's like, okay, the gates are everywhere across New Zealand in weird locations.
Well, there's Avernian gates. Those are your gates into the underworld. In most areas, they open and close.
They're clogged
naturally
up right now by the maelstrom, so you need to. What a lot of these guys doing are getting them reopen, and there's a few chronicle hooks they're talking about here, which is ending the maelstrom is one of the ones you can do, where it's like, we're going to try to subdue the maelstrom. The premise of the chronicle is basically that while this one is that instead what's going on here is that in the underworld, as mentioned before in Geist, there are these very powerful spirits called Kerberoi. Basically, imagine like the uber ghosts that may not even have ever been alive. They're basically like the big kahuna of the spirit world, except in the underworld. These Kerberoi often operate on very old laws, very old principles. They're very inhuman. The closest thing to them probably are Geists.
And in this case, so the best way to describe this chronicle is Phoenix Wright, Ghost Attorney.
Yeah, to a degree, but more.
It straight up is. There are two slap fighting each other because there's the old primal law, and then there's the English law.
Yeah, basically that the spiritual disorder is caused literally by the treaty, where because the treaty has come into effect, there's now two competing sets of rules for how do you do ghost shit. It's a very old world concept, but I like it. Honestly, it's quite fun.
Again, this is first edition where it's like toolkitty. I mean, it's also still toolkitty, so you can use this if you want. This could actually unironically be a way you could do a silly Wraith game where it's like you have to basically deal with the ghost courts of the Maori.
It's Orpheus 2.0. We have to go into the underworld to find the ghosts and tell them to please stop fighting.
No, you have to do the legal. You have to get a judge to preside over ghost court.
Yeah, and in any case, the Kerberoi aren't the only ones.
I like how you're not
fighting over
happy at
this.
the idea of ghost court. Come on.
I like Ghost Court, but I think it's you're missing a bit of the point of this, where it's like they're also talking about how you could just literally go fuck it and try to establish your own dominion of the underworld just for modern New Zealand.
Invent new ghost laws.
Yeah,
It's the sequel to Ghost Cop. First he was Ghost Cop. Then
now
he was
Ghost
Ghost
Lawyer.
Judge. Now he is Ghost President. That could be the entire Chronicle, where like originally you're just trying to instill law, like get ghosts into the gates and shit, or to like slacken the hurricanes in limited areas to let the gates stay open long enough for people to go out. And then you're like, you know what? I gotta figure out what's going wrong, and you invent your own New Zealand ghost law.
Yeah. I mean, you could do that. The next one, of course, is they're talking about like the weird ghost stories in New Zealand. Go play with that. Not as fun
Yeah,
as
like the Eternal
let's
Mare.
go slap up. Let's do ghost court stuff. Yeah. This one is they then go into like the inspirations, where it's like, what is New Zealand like?
There's a
which
tribal warrior who lost his village, who basically, even in death, he still kills.
Yeah. So the really fun part about this section, and the section that I think everyone was going to when this first was published, when they reached this section, is right down here. Chronicles of Darkness. What the fuck are the other supernaturals actually doing here?
So the inspirations include, because there's a lot. Let's be fair. You need to know like what led them to this. There's the Scarecrow and Came a Hot Friday, both of which showed small town life in New Zealand.
Which came directly and inspired the Railway Battalion group. Once We Were Warriors, which is about the diaspora of the Maori from rural life to urban squalor, basically.
What Becomes of the Brokenhearted in Jake's Long Shadow, and then The Haunting.
And then there's The Haunting, which is an actual book about a fucking spooky boy. And then there's another one with spooky witches in New Zealand.
And here's some other ones.
Are actually pretty good.
The only one I'm familiar with is Once Were Warriors and Heavenly Creature.
Yeah. The piano is kind of interesting.
But here's what they were doing on New Zealand. So vampires are a very recent addition to New Zealand's supernatural landscape. They really only arrived at all during World War II.
Yeah, and it's for a very simple reason. Nobody fucking lives here.
Basically, vampires have to have low populations, mainly because resources are pretty limited, and on top of that, you can't be too egregious with feeding. So until New Zealand started to grow in population, vampires kind of just wrote it off because it would be starving to death in the woods somewhere, probably. At least as far as they're concerned. World War II changed this perception a little bit, and now you can find a couple of communities on the 3 largest cities, and maybe the occasional rogue one wandering the town side as a weird, I don't know, person using the trains. There are no werewolves, by the way, at all.
Yeah. Werewolves do not come to New Zealand. They consider it off limits, partly to the maelstrom, because they get torn apart as they come in, and also due to the fact that I think probably the first ones that came here realized that the spirit world here really doesn't fucking match anything else. I'd say that like Australia and New Zealand and Polynesia in general, you're probably not going to find werewolves there. It's too different from Pangea, which is like a wild thing to say. But
I kind of disagree with that. I would say in this case it's more along the lines of the spirits collectively would just kill it.
Yeah, because the spirits here have never been part of that ecosystem.
Well, or if they have, it's been so long since then that you'd have to bring entire tribes to subdue them, and that's probably not going to work even then.
Yeah.
They're just too powerful. They've been left to their own devices way too long. Not happening.
Yeah.
There are no werewolves. Mages, they are affected by the maelstrom. In this case, though,
It's mostly the spirit arcana. They
outside
may
of
have
that, you
caused
can
it.
find them.
No confirmation. Changelings are actually relatively common.
Mainly because there's a lot of horrible, essentially quasi-fae lurking around.
Yep. They mentioned that their perspectives of time duration are off, or whether the hedges of only form a weak barrier. No one can really say. They form on landscapes instead of seasons. Prometheans are kind of here occasionally.
There are a few that appear. They don't usually get made here. They usually move here.
Speaking of which, we have mummies. There are no mummies here.
There are no mummies. Very rarely an artifact will spring up. Usually, in this case, in the 50s, it's probably because it was looted during World War II. Fuck beasts. Anything that this book says about beasts, I can ignore. I find it funny that this is where they mostly are.
They say there's a lot of them here in the Maori tribes. Doesn't really matter. And perhaps related, there's very little gob machine presence.
And as a result, yeah.
Hunters are very skilled in keeping contact with their Aussie counterparts. New Zealand hunter groups are likely to incorporate Maori tribal hunting ethos into their methods, and may or may not do haka, which sounds absolutely fucking crazy.
So this is an interesting setting because usually in every setting we covered before then, they at least try to say that there's minimal presence. Like it's probably this is the first where they decisively
this is the first where they basically like no, these supernaturals really aren't here,
which I think is a bit weird, but I understand.
I completely understand, and it gives it a very unique flavor where it's like the
my biggest problem though is that by this logic they could have done it in any of the other ones they did.
Yeah, I know, but like that's the thing. New Zealand is so isolated from the rest of the world to me that this makes sense.
So yeah, in this case, if you're in New Zealand as a Geist, you might run into a vampire. There might be an occasional
run into a
mage.
changeling. There's probably mages here on vacation.
And Beast doesn't count.
And yeah, nobody cares about Beast. We try to forget about Beast. Oh, and there are.
You missed the first part. Okay, so there's a maelstrom. So basically, here's the situation. New Zealand, for the longest time, was not settled by man at all. The spirits were there, but they were primordial beings. New Zealand was untouched by man. That might actually be why Iratha never have a claim on it because of this.
Yeah. So then,
although I will say this, actually no, I will say this. This also means by this logic, Madagascar should have no werewolves either. They weren't settled until 800. Well, no, because it wasn't settled until 1000 AD. Remember?
Yeah.
Malagasy settled very late, so.
Yeah, like again,
you might find Iratha on Australia, but I don't think you should. Maybe a shifter native to Australia, but that's about it.
There's probably some shifters native to Australia, and you might see some transplant werewolves because there's been people there long enough for there to be that ecosystem. It's just you wouldn't have werewolves.
There'd be some packs in like Queensland, and that's about it.
Yeah, like the werewolves there would be imports, foreigners mostly.
And even then, I'd say there's some effects.
Not a lot.
Because the Aborigines were there. Also, Ghost Law there would be very much Aboriginal.
Ghost Law there is going to be fucking wild, like the Dreamtime shit, man.
Oh, yeah, because there's no past or present. There's only dream.
Yeah.
No, there's no past or future. It's all the same happening
There's no past, present, or future. It is all. The Dreamtime is everything. Welcome to the spirit world of Australia. It is a fucking trip.
So, that's Australia. They've had people living there for tens of thousands of years. New Zealand not until 1300s.
Yeah. Now, on top of all that, this means that there's a rapid shift in the spiritual ecosystem.
Because first humans made it there. Well, no, first Maori made it in. This builds the beginnings of a human afterlife, which intrudes upon the original kind of just pure primordial spirit realm, because it was just purely spirit back then.
Yeah, there's no ghosts kicking around. Then suddenly, ghosts now are here, and they appear to make their own weird cultural traditions, like where they go and cross the island.
Which annoys them, which annoys the spirits, leads to some eating, but leads to some commingling, and there's it starts to happen. Then the Europeans show up, and to give you an idea, the afterlife
at this point, spiritual shit.
At this point, the afterlife is somewhat unfinished because it takes time for it to build up.
Yeah.
So it starts building on top of each other in a way that just isn't working right. There's these things called Arvernian gates, which are the
The
afterlife's limp
transplant to the
system.
underworld, yeah.
Yeah, that takes you to and from the underworld, depending on output. There's also the barriers are starting to be built, but because of this conflict in essentially how you have the base of Maori with like conflicting with the base of the English undead law, European undead law, it creates a essentially ghost storm because there's conflict between how they interpret everything.
And because the ghost realm of New
Ghosts
Zealand is
can't
so
leave
yeah,
because of this conflict, because what gates do they do? Do they go into the English gates, which, by the way, sometimes overlap the original Maori gates and block them? Or do I use the Maori gates, which might have crumbled or might have been placed over, especially since there's arguments over this?
and on top of that,
Those gates are staying closed, a lot of essence energy is building up, and this creates a ghost storm.
because as I was about to say, because the underworld of the Maori and the shadow, like the ecosystem there is already integrated together more than probably anywhere else on the planet at this point. We get this weird case where you now have a bunch of other spirits who are already there and already very powerful and are very new in a way, but not really. More like their concept of like like the way that a human would define it is new to them, but they've always been there.
They've just developed more a new plan. So the Taniwa,
They've just developed a new identity. That's all. Like
the Taniwa are your spirits, which usually are bad. In most parts of the world, spirits wandering around like this would be very bad. But because they've been able to form themselves for so long and just dealing with humans, they essentially are able to find multiple ways to pick up essences because they're the elements of many things. Like it's the Taniwa of a river isn't just purely the river itself; it's also the fish in the river and the life that.
And then also on top of that, the Maori concept has been thrown on to them of river,
which gives them a little more power and another source.
Yeah.
So they don't have to basically suckle on the Maori's essentially essence and drive them batty. They don't have to do that. They just kind of sit there and chill as long as the taboos and the pacts are respected. They don't have to do shit since it doesn't threaten them.
Yeah. So with that in mind,
so spirits are pretty. They play ball. They play ball. They're relatively.
They're playing ball, but that's what also is causing the maelstrom because these negative emotion spirits are getting basically a fucking feast because all these dead people can't move on.
Literally because the gates are shut. Because what underworld system are we using now?
That's one of the theories behind it. You can do basically anything you wanted to do for the reason why this is happening.
Because that's more first edition. The other one is just overlay upon overlay, like rapid changing in the way that Spirit Realm works there. It's causing some severe distortions.
Yeah.
It'll probably smooth out by the end of the century, though.
Yeah, it basically is confirmed to have at this point.
But because of that, and because of just how quickly things settled, you don't find werewolves because they weren't with. They do. They're not among the Polynesians either.
Yeah, like I wouldn't expect to have many werewolves in Polynesia.
Oh no, there'd be other shifters. None at all.
I mean, are there any wolves native there? No. Then no.
There might be a dog shifter. The dog shifters might be there, but
there might be dog shifters, but I don't know how many of them there would be.
And they probably all died out outside of
It's sort of like sub-Saharan Africa. There are some small like canid populations down in there, but it's not all wolves. But you'd probably have like weird werewolf groups that are more like African wild dogs and jackal shifters and things like that, where they're close enough to werewolves to be functionally identical. They're just not quite the same.
I'm just envisioning wild dogs, like what was it, the Papua New Guinea singing dog?
Those things, yeah.
Singing dog shifters where they use the power of song to banish monsters.
Yeah.
Do you like it?
That's fun. But we should probably wrap this up here.
We're basically done, yeah. Here's the end of the
Cold War. We've been going for about 2.5 hours. It's the next one is Cold War Demon.
Tech, we haven't even done 2.5 hours. Like 2 minutes, 2 hours 10. We're good.
Oh, that's pretty good for a lore rambles. That's a short episode.
I legitimately had to ramble. That's literally. If you're wondering why I was so insistent, it's because I knew it was going to be short.
Yeah. Again, it's not a bad setting by any means. It's just
No, it's a great setting. It's just much like New Zealand.
This?
Yeah, much like New Zealand, it's very isolated. It also calls probably the second most popular book. Like, you can't really do a werewolf chronicle. Literally, you die if you land on New Zealand because of the maelstrom.
Yeah,
Same with demons, by the way. Since demons make pacts and essentially are powered by soul magic, yeah, they're fucked too.
yeah, more like there's not been enough time for the God Machine to set up any infrastructure in New Zealand because there's no people here. Like that's the point right there. That's why there's no demons really, is that there's no infrastructure.
And remember, demons spawn from infrastructure because they have to be angels
They're
that
they're
maintain
slightly
and follow.
reliant on it.
Yeah.
And you might say, well, then is New Zealand hell? And the answer to that is no. The God Machine's still there. It's just it doesn't have like
The God
infrastructure.
Machine literally just started building infrastructure.
Yeah, as soon as people
Like,
started arriving.
and even then, it wasn't a lot. Like, it only started really and fully after the 20th century.
Yeah. So I
There
mean,
might be
it's also like
a
why would
demon or two, but that's about it.
they're not active basically is a way to put it. This isn't like Constantinople. Where like there's so much shit going on layers upon layers of human habitation and empires and plots and all this sort of stuff, where it's like it's inevitable that you would get a major demon population somewhere like that, and the cyclic nature there as well of demons. This is a different sort of environment overall. I have to say that this is possibly the hardest one of our settings to rate, because on the one hand, I do like that they made an actual effort to try to make 1950s New Zealand interesting. And
Details
they
are
obviously
interesting. It's informative. This is coming from near ignorance because neither of us were really, you know.
we're not exactly super familiar with Polynesian culture here.
It's interesting, but it feels lacking. It feels like this is a setting they started and just refused to give up on when they didn't have far to go. They gave enough that to give
They
you an
gave it
idea. Squirrel Killer, by comparison, I think this is still a lot better than To the Strongest.
it's like they have an idea for an
And I
overarching
liked this
plot
a
for an
lot more than
adventure.
Raven and Wolf.
Yeah, it's like they have a plot for an adventure, right? They have an idea of like a campaign book that they wanted to do, but they could never actually do.
Because
That's
it's
kind of what
just
it
not
feels like
enough. Yeah, it wasn't enough, so they put it in into the
in
Dark Errors
this.
book.
That's what it feels like to a degree, but
Because
at the
they
same
found
time,
enough weird shit in like 1954 for it to be a thing.
in like the 1950s in New Zealand, it's like somebody noticed like all these little weird things that would work for a spooky ghost story or like all this sort of stuff that fit with a lot of the themes of Geist, that had a lot of this, and then they pitched it, and then someone's like, you know that Geist barely sold, and the Book of the Dead didn't do too well either. Those are the only two books of the Geist line until second edition, and second edition Geist is also a solo book at this point. um,
Unfortunate, but fair.
Unfortunate but fair. It's not exactly a super popular splat, despite probably being the most interesting of them in terms of like what you can do with it. Uh, that we're looking at this weird quasi, uh, like they wanted to do so much more, but they really couldn't.
Maybe it was going to be the third book, and then when they saw the
But
sales numbers.
but at the same time, it doesn't feel like that, does it?
No. It's weird. I would say that I still like out of all of the ones, if I have to, let me just look at all of the examples we looked at before. Let's look at all of them. I like it better than To the Strongest, but that's not hard because I think they took a really interesting concept, which was Alexander the Great unifying all of these schools of thought among mages, and that kind of creating the systems that will eventually come. That's cool, but they fucked it up because there wasn't a lot of good adventure hooks that they came up with.
It's more like they weren't focusing. I think part of the problem with that is they were focusing on such a wide area rather than like, okay, let's focus more on a narrow section of where everything's coming together, like Alexandria.
Like Sestestefan or
Yeah, like
yeah,
why not a highlight of all the major cities of
Sestestefan,
Alexandria's empire?
Alexandria in Egypt, I should say,
Babylon,
Babylon,
or
and Pergamon.
yeah, and maybe something out over in India as well. Like just sort of like give you a better idea of what's kind of
I'm trying to
happening because it's such a
remember what's
wide
the
area.
Alexandria. I think it's called Alexandria Ashanti, which is the capital of the Bactrian state. Alexandria
Yeah,
Ashanti, Babylon, instead of Sestestefan. I don't know what a city in Persia would be at this point. I probably would
uh,
just go with Sestestefan.
Ctesiphon.
No, that's basically in Iraq too.
Yeah,
That's
it's
why if
hard
you used
to.
Babylonia, wait, no, Seleucia. Okay, I remember now. Because
Yeah,
Seleucia was
I
built on Babylon's bones, and then
yeah
I would say Pergamon in Greece, Pella in Macedonia, and then Alexandria in Egypt. Like basically, I would have done the capitals of each successor state just to kind of show like
yeah,
what the
and
mages were
then
doing
talk
in
more
there.
about like the Diadochi Wars in general and like the.
Like and basically where the mages like the mages are trying to figure out what the fuck to do since this kind of fell apart before they were finished their project and shit. The Three Kingdoms Darkness was good, so not that
Three
one.
Kingdoms of Darkness is such a. I love it, but it barely touches Geist.
It barely
Honestly,
touches Geist. It's basically just you gotta deal with all the dead, and that's about it.
and to be fair, that's totally fine. I think that that's totally fine because of the amount of fucking dead people in China at this
Yeah,
point.
the Wolf and Raven, I fucking hate Squirrel Killer. By the way, you're right, Susa. Susa is what I was thinking of.
Yeah, like
The Wolf and Raven, that is basically some guy was like, I don't even remember the name of that shitty fucking battle. Let me look. What's the name of that shit?
they're like this
The
battle is
Battle
really
of
important.
fucking Clontarf. Cool. Very cool. I don't give a fuck.
There's if this is like the end of the Viking Age. Why are we not setting it in like when the Vikings were all
Why
over the
aren't we
place?
covering it during the Great Heathen Army? If you're going to pick a specific year, at least pick that one, or at least pick the time
Or
of
the raid
Alfred
on
the
the
Great.
sign, or like the raid on the sign, or that sort of thing, or even like the settlement of the Normandy, like something like that, where it's like, oh,
The,
here's where
the,
an
the best
epic
way
is
to
being
describe it,
shaped.
okay, the best way to describe it is you have a professional butcher prepare an excellent A5 Wagyu for you. And on top of that, has essentially prepared each and every ingredient to make the most luxuriant 5-course meal.
And then you
You have
put it on
high.
an absolutely god awful fucking bun
No, no,
with
no.
the
What you do,
worst
it's like
mustard.
you have your A5 Wagyu steak, like high quality Wagyu steak. You have your excellently sourced purple yams that are like highest grade quality, prepared excellently to make as a roast. You have you have high quality greens like of asparagus or of what is it, spinach. The high quality Gruyere, excellent quality Gruyere cheese and brie and like high, amazing luxury cheese, a fine Pinot Noir to go with it, and then last but not least, you have all of the ingredients to make a triple layer dessert cake, and you decide to essentially microwave the fucking steak. You
Yeah,
take the steak, you throw it in the fucking microwave, pull out the ketchup, deep fat fry the yams after fuck it up and burn them. Drizzle it in
it's
cheese,
still
microwave the fucker, and then when the steak is well done in the microwave, put it on the thing till it's slightly burnt, and then douse the fucker in ketchup.
it's still edible. It's still not like
You
the
took
worst thing you can
Wagyu
ever
steak
taste,
and you
but you
well
still kind of
done the
fucked up the
fucker.
preparation. Like that's a good way to put it. Where it's like there's a lot of other things they could have done with the Viking Age, and they didn't do it. And it's more that's like it's not that they didn't include some of that stuff.
So the Wolf
It's
and
just that
Raven,
they
which is my
focused on a
least
weird
favorite
time.
module. Hello there, Sublime Mind. So the Wolf and Raven was their attempt to do werewolf, and I think it was change.
Geist
It was
that
Geist
was
and
the other Geist
werewolf.
setting,
It was Geist and
and it
werewolf
was it
Viking
was a
Age.
bit of a forced
They
it was a
they
bit of a
picked the
forced Geist
Battle of
setting, honestly.
Clontarf, which was the final stand of Brian Boru, and I'm like, oh, that's like the
Viking
lamest
Ireland,
battle.
and they're not
It's
even doing the
solely about
fun.
the battle too.
Yeah, they focus way too much on the battle
It's
instead of like,
solely on the
oh, the
battle.
Viking Ireland in general. Like if it was Viking Ireland in general, that would be
That
an
would have been fine.
interesting.
If it was Viking Ireland, I would have been perfectly okay with it. Like that would have
Because
been
that's a
great.
weird, fun time period that people forget about. That like, yeah, Dublin was a Viking city.
So this is basically okay. You have your A5 Wagyu. This is sourced from Japan, from an actual farm. They massaged the cow. They luxurious 5-star, glorious 3 years of life before being humanely killed and
With a
served.
fucking samurai sword in halal fashion or some shit. Like
And it
I
is perfectly prepared to you by a butcher. It is
And
professionally
you
cut,
slapped ketchup
ready
on
to
that
put.
motherfucker and threw it in the microwave.
Then you throw it into the microwave or boil it.
You had it
You
Donald
boil
Trump
it.
style.
No, you
You,
boil it in ketchup.
you had it Donald Trump style, which is with ketchup and well done.
You well done boil it in ketchup.
That's unironically how the man eats his steaks.
To be fair, if you finally slice a steak that's like not good after well doning it, it might not be the worst. But yeah, that's not how you eat a good steak.
That's not how you eat a good steak at all. That's not how you eat steak. For
It's
fuck's sake.
if you have a bad steak, that might be a way to save it. But yeah, no.
Well, I mean, Trump steaks were pretty bad. Remember those?
Yeah.
That was one of the
What, you
worst
want me to
business
stop
of all
talking
time.
about microwaving Wagyu steak? This would
I
be
really
like
do. I really do want you to stop talking about that because we're way off. But yeah, it's like this setting feels like not like
it has the same energy of Wolf and Raven, but it's actually interesting.
yeah, it might be because we're not from New Zealand.
That's
And
the
I
only
guess
reason. If you're from New Zealand, I imagine this would be your least favorite
I
scene.
imagine that this is one where you're like, "Oh,
Cool, I
okay.
get to tell ghosts to fuck off a train. Okay. What's the point?
Okay, what's the point?" But like for people who like again, as somebody noted, like New Zealand's population is like a statistical blip on the planet. Even nowadays, it is not a very populous country.
To give you an idea, Requiem for Regina's changeling setting,
which we found
a wet
like
fart. It's a wet fart.
it's a wet fart, but it's connected to a really really good section of the
Vampire
book.
one.
It's more like we had to include changelings, so we're just putting changeling here. It's kind of stapled on, but the nature of the interaction with the changelings with like the vampires is the interesting
It
part
makes
of it,
it up.
honestly.
It's just that video is so long because Requiem for Regina. But
Yeah, like
straight up, God's Own Country. It is most like Wolf and Raven, but unlike Wolf and Raven, I like this one more, noticeably.
here's the thing. I don't know
Wolf
if
and
I would
Raven is more
ever.
playable though.
Yeah, I don't know if I would ever run a game with this. Like,
Oh
I could
God,
see
no.
myself somehow convincing people to play
I could run a
Great
saga.
Depression era.
I could run a
Yeah,
saga, and that's about it.
yeah. I could run. I could run like Great Depression Promethean. Like, I could probably convince some players to play Promethean with that setting. I don't see how you can convince anyone to pick up Geist First Edition with this setting. I'm sorry to say.
Oh boy, Dark Eras. I think the one setting for those Dark Era books I like is the Second Sight one in the Age of Spiritualism. What's that one about? Did we cover that one?
That one is in Companions,
Ah.
where they it's also sort of a Geist setting because well spiritual actually that should have been the baseline Geist setting. It would have been amazing for that, but
no, let's
C.S.
make
Levy.
what we did, and oh no, the sales plummeted into a crater.
Well, Geist. I'm going to be fair. Geist is a niche game. Geist is a very niche game.
I'm actually surprised Promethean sold well enough to get the books it did.
Promethean was always planned to be a 5-book series.
Oh, so they just
the
ate
sales
the cost.
they ate the cost. It was a
That's
limited run
unfortunate.
game line. The same with Changeling the Lost. Changeling the Lost actually exceeded its projected game line.
Well, I mean, you're essentially running away from the Cthulhu, so it's fair.
Yeah, Changeling the Lost. It's interesting to note that there was only I think supposed to be 5 books for it, but the reception was incredibly positive and incredibly successful that they decided to extend it out and release more books for it. Because you've got to remember that old Changeling was
you might have played in a game that used the Wolf and Raven setting, but without the Geist stuff. So, how many times did you and your gang try to stop Brian Boru's death? I'm not fucking with you. It's solely about the Battle of Clontarf, which I want to scream into a pillow. That book, that literal setting still pisses me off because it's such a goddamn waste.
And the thing is, it's not bad. That's the worst thing about it. It's not like it's not like
this
it's
would be like,
unforgivably
okay,
bad.
so somehow I'm like wandering in New York. I get into Trump Tower somehow. Like Trump's like, hey, I'm gonna get you the best steak, the greatest steak. He hands me his fucking steak, and I'm like, You
Really?
goddamn clown. I'd eat it. I'd be like, you goddamn fucking clown. Fucking clown. You should have just gotten me a Big Mac. And then he just hands me a Big Mac. And it would be better. Like, honestly, I really hate Wolf and Raven. So yeah, next week.
Like, okay, so we do have to give a rating to this. I'd
Oh, yeah.
say playable. I mean, that's the worst thing I can say about this is that
Yeah,
it's
it's
like
playable.
I think this is the worst we have to rate it because it's like Wolf and the Raven at least has the Viking thing going for it. This is
No, we had to
also
give
very
it. We
good.
had to give it to it. No. Like, let's be fair. Did we rate it playable? Because I'm gonna give it a higher playable than Wolf and Raven, and
Let's
here's
let's
why.
actually what's the one above playable? Because I'd give it that
Decent.
decent. Yeah, like I'd give it a decent because it's not something I can see myself playing. It's
No.
not
I could
something I
see
can see.
myself running a short, I don't know, 3-part saga. Like, let's say you're on a tourist ship. Like, you are part of a tourist
A
ship.
tour. You're on a tour ship around New Zealand, and
Or
you have
like
to stop
you're
the
on an
spooky
ocean
ghost.
liner and you're trapped on a storm and you have to figure out what's caused the maelstrom to manifest in real space. Because the boat
Yeah,
is basically stuck in this gyre. That you could do something like that, or you could do a short saga about resolving the issues with what was it? The train victims, or you have to deal with one of the angry spirits because some idiot broke a taboo. Like
yeah.
you could do sagas. I don't think you could do a full chronicle. So I'd say it's decent because of that. Wolf and Raven, it's just the goddamn Battle of Clontarf. We literally, I think we spent most of that entire book just talking about the Vikings because of how offensive it was.
Yeah. This is one of those things where it's like most of Dark Heroes is very good. Then there's just like this where it's like okay, it's good, it's well written. It's just why would you play this?
In terms of Dark Eras, this is in my opinion, the second worst.
And I don't want it to be. Is the sad thing. I think that this is a lot better
But in
than
terms of enjoyability, it takes it from second worst to, I'd say, fourth worst.
yeah,
Because
like
to the strongest, you have a stronger baseline, but you need to do more of the legwork yourself because these plot hooks are fucking terrible. Wolf and
this
Raven is
gives
a
you
wash.
this gives you some this gives you some plot hooks. This gives you some stuff to do. It's just that it's
And
also
I'd say beneath the skin, it's clunky. You'd have to come up with your own
beneath the
chronicles.
skin has the robber fish.
It does
It
have
wins.
robberfish, and it does have a weird Stone Age demon aspect to it.
And like uh beneath the skin is a fantastic setting in general because it's just
It's just it
it,
has
it,
some
it
of the problems that, if I recall, it had some of the problems that To the Strongest did in terms of it not having great plot hooks. But because it covered a longer period and it actually went into the setting itself, it saved itself by reinforcing itself with fluff and
yeah,
odd events and things, and gives you ideas to work with.
of like high strangeness and that sort of thing and the nature of like weird god machine plots, I guess is a way to put it
You thought
too.
the New Zealand setting would be cool, but oof, I don't know. It's actually, I think that it does have some pretty
It's
interesting stuff. It's just New Zealand is a
yeah.
very quiet place. Um, and Geist is a very situational book. It's more like a combination of Ghostbusters and Scooby Doo or The Crow.
A crow is an inspiration for Geist. I think they even mentioned that.
It's essentially you're either a spirit of vengeance coming to finish some task, or you're the Scooby Doo gang basically trying to uncover the
or you're
ghost
like I want
ghost
to say like
soldiers.
John Constantine almost.
Constantine
Like
is also pretty fitting, although I think he works better as a mage. Basically, you're the type of dude who deals with things when the spirit worlds get nasty.
yeah.
Like if a werewolf ain't available, and honestly those guys are crazy enough they might go after people, they call you.
Well, no. Senators usually do not interact with the spirit world directly. They interact almost entirely with ghosts.
Yeah.
It's just that New Zealand's a weird place where that line is very blurred right now. You know?
When you frames Geist correctly, it can be exciting, but the Wraith connection you feel that's part of it. It's been a
It's
first
very
edition
hard.
associated it
Yeah,
with it too much. Second
it's
edition fixed that.
second edition fixed that by basically going like, okay, you know all the parts of Wraith about everything being inevitably depressing and down and all that. Fuck that. We're going into the underworld with hookers and blow, and we're gonna set up our new afterlife and fuck everyone else if we have to. Like, you can do that, or you can do spooky ghost hunting adventures with it, or you can do more traditional, like, we're having to negotiate with the fucking mafia bosses of the underworld to get somebody back.
Unironically, another way you can frame a Geist game, just for those who need inspiration. Unironically, you can take a little bit of inspiration from. I don't like the anime or the manga, but you could take it from Bleach a little bit.
Bleach is
A little bit.
one of
Just
the
you
like
tone
early
it down.
Bleach,
Note
like
early
really
Bleach.
early
If you
Bleach
handle Bleach like that, like before all the weird shit happens,
before it went full shonen. Yeah,
before it goes full shonen, where you're basically just you could run it like that. That would work. The early part of Chainsaw Man, kind of
oh god,
before things go fall apart, you can kind of see it like that. It just takes a certain mindset to get it done, to get it right, and that's why I think God's Own Country I would rate it higher than Wolf and Raven, but it is not a very effective setting. You're not going to get long campaigns out of it.
yeah.
One shots, yes. Even short
This is
campaigns, sure, but nothing
yeah.
longer.
This is definitely one thing where it's like, if I had to like say, okay, I need a game out of nowhere, I guess I could say, okay, you're all in 1950s New Zealand on a train, and it's about to go down. I guess you could use that for
Or
this.
alternatively, it is the 1950s in the New Zealand. Each of you have made a deal previously, either through war, pestilence, plague, and
And now
you've all
you
been
you're
drawn because of a horrific tragedy. The big horrible train
whatever.
accident
Yeah,
happened,
a big horrible train accident where somebody everyone
and
someone that died because there were whatever, like a tourist group
they've
on the
reopened
train
the
or whatever.
line, but there's been
Ghost
issues.
train, woo woo. Like you can do a lot with this. It's just that it's
Or alternatively, a recent farming initiative has led to blight among sheep, and you find out they
a
accidentally broke a
sheep.
taboo. They
Sheep
broke
don't get blight. They that's
the sheep disease.
sheep blight. What the fuck are you talking about?
Sheep are plants.
As we all know, the sheep of New Zealand are in reality plants that will come to kill us all, as noted by the great movie Black Sheep, the only
I was
horror
actually
movie featuring fucking sheep.
I was thinking they mutate into the Triffids from Day of the Triffids.
Oh, okay. Now I see where you're going here.
But no, like the sheep rot, the sheep disease, and you find out that what happened was a spirit has been angered because it is the spirit of this hill, and the hill was essentially mutilated for this sheep farm.
Yeah,
Like that's
I
another example.
yeah.
Again,
Again,
it's short campaigns. You can't do a long one.
it's really hard to do a long one out of this if you weren't like really familiar with New Zealand, I guess. I mean, a lot of these are campaigns where it's like it would be a short campaign if in the setting. Uh, that's one of the things about Dark Arrows that doesn't work as well, is it's a little bit harder to run a long-term historical game without a lot of material. Um, Dark Arrows doesn't always provide a lot of material. It often gives you links to get to more material to use,
The
but
best way Geist works is exactly as Squirrel Killer says. They're really good for short one-shot or episodic campaigns.
yeah, it'd be something like if you're having your Geist
Hunter also
characters clean
favors
up.
it, but Geist it's even better. Like I said, it's best to do episodic runs with it.
I'd say that it's the way to put it is that it is like uh again, it's hard to get the term right. Um, this is one of those things where you're looking at a again I'm struggling to find the words because it's genuinely hard to find them. Uh, this is a game where you'd want to be using it where your Geist players are cleaning up whatever the fuck happened in your other sessions. Um,
Oh, it's like Viscera cleanup detail, that
Yeah,
indie game.
like if you're doing Geist right, I think that that's one of the better ways to do like an episodic campaign of Geist is to, in between every campaign like arc that you're doing of another supernatural group, because obviously a bunch of people are gonna fucking die because it's World of Darkness. You have the Geists have to come in, like your Sin Eaters have to come in and try to fix the issues that you've created, and it gives you a way to like both compliment your players and also bully them a little bit
Especially if
because
they
it
were really stupid.
yeah, because this way you can go with like, yeah, you saved the city, but you also killed 50 people,
Also,
and now there's a
unironically,
lot of other shit that caused
al-
with run-on effects that that Sin Eaters are
also
dealing with.
unironically, because you bring in Geist, you can then introduce the recurring antagonist, the ghost of that who your fuck up killed. Because
Yeah,
they can say something like, "I'll haunt you till the day you die," and they mean it.
and they mean it. Yeah, and you can have like that sort of thing where there is a ghost that is chasing your group, your other group, and the Sin Eaters have no idea why this is happening and are chasing down your actual group to try to fuck them up because that's the only way to get rid of this ghost.
Like they
And
are powered by basically the desire to kill the one that ruined everything.
yeah, now I wouldn't say that this is the kind of game you could play with your average group
No, you'd have to have
because
multiple games at once. It's a bit fucky
it'd
wucky.
be a bit fucky wucky, but it'd be an interesting way to do a campaign. um, or like a follow-up campaign to another one would be to okay, you know all those people that you knew that died in this like hunter group.
A
Well, a
couple
good
of them
chunk
are
of them
angry
became,
enough to keep haunting you now.
or a few of them came back from the dead, and then you handed somebody a character sheet
Oh, that
based on
could
an
be great.
NPC.
Like you open up, like the very first thing you remember is the pain of a shotgun ripping through your chest as some
Yeah,
arrogant shithead who basically is like your standard '90s asshole take on like a hunter, like edgy
or a
fucking
vampire
drunk,
or whatever.
or yeah, like edgy
Like
vampire fuck. And you know one thing, the entity
fuck
you
that
made a
guy.
deal with. The entity you made a deal with, and better yet, you can make it a previous person they killed. The Geist is another victim, and you both
They
agree,
mentioned that
fuck this guy.
one of the possibilities for a Geist is that there was an interesting one where it was somebody who died in an accident, right, with another person, that it was their fault, but the Geist is actually the other person who died. That in that brief period of time that they were dead, for whatever reason, they were able to become that Geist and become something that wasn't human from their own rage or frustration or whatever else. And then now they're back and they're haunting you, and they've made a deal to bring you back to make you suffer for what you did. Like there's some pathos you can really do with Geist.
Like I'm envisioning, say you have an asshole vampire group. They wipe a
Yeah,
dozen. So what happens is you then cut to like you go, hey, I want to do a Geist one shot, and they go, sure.
and you hand over the character sheets for the people they fucking killed.
And then the very first thing is you hear and you find out that the Geists possessing them are all previous victims of asshole vampire group who through
Yeah,
rage and betrayal, like maybe one of them was a ghoul they just killed for yucks, through sheer rage became ghouls, Geists, and their goal is to just destroy them.
it'd be a fun way to do like a follow-up campaign for some games, I'd say. Like, yes, congratulations, Patrick, you've saved the city by burning it down. Now here's the cleanup crew. You know,
Unironically, Geist works probably best as the cleanup crew.
that's kind of what they are in a lot of cases. It's Geist is one of the games where it's like it's really easy to actually cross it over with almost every other supernatural because almost every supernatural at some point or another is going to probably create a ghost. Some supernaturals like mages can literally just make a ghost or interact with them in other weird ways where they would probably find a Sin Eater a very interesting person to be around. Then there's something like Prometheans where they'd probably be interested because they're corpses that are animated by a divine force, just like them. Well, sort of divine.
So it's been about 3 hours now, proper. Now it's a proper lore rambling.
Now the proper ramble, and I guess that the last half of this has been
Just
how do you
talking about
actually
how to
run?
use Geist because I'll be honest, it's a game that you need to think about. It's like Promethean. Promethean, I think if you really struggle to run with it, it's best done episodically.
Yeah, Geist also works really well episodically, but it
Same
also
with
would
Mummy.
work as like a follow-up
Unironically,
campaign.
most of them, besides I'd say Werewolf, Hunter, and Vampire, work probably best episodically. Oh, and Changeling. Those are the
Mage,
ones that are pop, and Mage to a degree.
I'd say that one of
Because
the
Ars
things that you
Magica
could,
kind of does it more episodically too.
yeah, I would say that probably the thing to do with Geist is to sit down and figure out how the fuck you're going to use it, because
Yeah, that's the other thing. It's similar to Promethean. Like with Promethean, it's more you're wandering around, so it's kind of like look for things where settings where people have already been wanderers, like unironically Fallout or hilariously post-apocalypse. Since they do the Man with No Name wandering and spaghetti westerns, are usually good inspiration on what they do, and
yeah,
kind of play it like that. Anyway, before it becomes 3 hours, I want to avoid that. Uh, so the book next week that we're probably going to cover. Let's think. There's option. We could always look at another Call of Cthulhu book. It's been a while since we've seen one of those.
yeah. If you want to do that, I probably won't be there for that one, but uh, there's a few other options that we could throw into the ring. I mean, there's well, oh no, we can't do that. We already did that one. I was about to say like more Rift stuff, but I guess we want Impset here for that.
Yeah, it's kind of Imset's little baby. Again, there's also more possible. There's more possible autistic analysis. Um, I'm thinking just because we could always take a look at either more Warhammer Fantasy roleplay. We could do that too.
That's always good.
So it's a bit on the open air. So with that in mind, you can feel free to suggest ideas.
Yeah,
Depending on if
feel
we
free
have
to
books.
like give us book suggestions because
So,
I know that we'll have to do bunnies and burrows at some point.
and I
It's
have that one.
inevitable.
So feel free
But
to make
that's like
suggestions in our Discord, which we do have a link to in this description.
also make sure to check out if you do in fact like what you've seen here. Go ahead and on Drive Through RPG, you can in fact purchase this whole book.
I make a point to
I
do
would say
that.
that it is. I would say that it is very much worth your money.
There's only
Um,
three. There's only three modules I think are not quite worth it, and actually it's more like 2.5.
yeah, like the the quality of this book is quite frankly fantastic.
Yeah, to give you an idea, the only again to the strongest and Wolf and Raven. Those are the only true flops in my opinion.
We have created roughly like what 24 plus hours of content out of this single book. That should give you an idea, right, of how dense this really is.
So yeah,
And what you
feel
can do
free
with
to
it with a
get a
little
copy on
creativity.
drive-through, and if you don't feel like that, they also split them into little pamphlets. You just kind of look for the one you're specifically into, and they sell those as
Yeah.
PDFs as well. So with that in mind, again, Discord's in the description. Feel free to like and subscribe if you wish. Bringing it up, you don't have to. And have an excellent night. Next week again is an open bar, sorta.
We'll figure out what had happened